There is an old question that runs through every spiritual tradition. It goes something like this: if peace is what we most deeply want, why does it seem so hard to find? Tonight, we are going to sit with a possibility that may change the shape of that question entirely. What if peace is not something to achieve? What if it is not waiting at the end of a long road, behind one more obstacle, inside one more accomplishment? What if peace is the mind's own nature, already here, already whole, and the only thing between us and it is the effort we spend trying to reach it? Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Our journey tonight is about coming home, about the long search that ends where it started, about the strange discovery that no one ever really left. We will walk with ancient stories and old teachings, and we will see, again and again, that the peace we have been looking for has been closer than close the entire time. So let everything else go for now. Let the body settle. Let the breath find its own rhythm. There is nowhere to get to tonight. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. A wise Thai forest teacher once gave a set of meditation instructions that sounded almost too simple. He said something close to this: allow the body to relax into the natural ease that is the body's own state. Allow the mind to relax into the natural ease that is the mind's own state. Then stay there. Simply be attentive to anything that arises to disturb that ease. Most meditation instructions begin with what to do. Focus on the breath. Watch the thoughts. This forest teacher's instruction begins somewhere else entirely. It begins with what is already present. It says, ease is here. Peace is here. You do not need to build it. You only need to stop interfering with it. This is a radical reversal. We spend so much of our lives chasing calm. We schedule retreats and download apps and buy candles and rearrange our evenings, all in pursuit of a state we hope to manufacture. And there is nothing wrong with any of that. But something shifts when we consider the possibility that the peace we are working so hard to produce is, in fact, the ground we are standing on the whole time. We are not trying to create stillness. We are trying to stop stirring up the water. There is a playful image that captures this. In most towns, there is a law against disturbing the peace. A person can be asked to quiet down, even taken aside for making too much noise in the night. Imagine that same ordinance turned inward. Imagine a small sign hanging in the mind: do not disturb the peace. Because that is what the teaching actually asks of us. The peace is already in residence. It was here before we arrived, and it will be here after the noise dies down. Our whole practice is simply learning to stop being the noisy neighbor in our own house. Joseph Goldstein, the American Vipassana teacher, once put it even more simply. He said, "Don't do anything. Just sit there." There is a kind of laughter that rises in the chest when you hear that, because it sounds like a joke, but it is also the most direct instruction imaginable. The mind's natural state, undisturbed, is at rest. Thoughts will come and go. Breath will come and go. Sensations will rise and pass. Even difficult feelings will arrive and leave. But the ground beneath all of it is still. It has always been still. The question is, can we trust that? There is an old story from the Taoist tradition. It is a story about a young man who lived in a fishing village on the eastern shore. Every morning, Before the nets were mended and the boats pushed out, this young man would walk down to the water's edge. He had been doing it since he was a boy. He would sit on the rocks at the tide line and simply be there, looking out at the grey-green sea, breathing the salt air. And every morning, the gulls would come. They came by the dozens, sometimes by the hundreds. They would land around him on the rocks, on the sand, even on his shoulders and arms. They showed no fear of him at all. They treated him as part of the landscape, the same way they treated the driftwood and the tide pools. He was simply another thing that belonged to the shore. The fishermen of the village would sometimes pause at their nets to watch. A boy sitting on the rocks, covered in seabirds, still as a post. None of them could explain it. Some of them had tried to lure the gulls with scraps of fish, holding out their hands for an hour at a time, and the birds would circle and cry and keep their distance. Whatever the boy had, it could not be baited. One evening, the young man's father said to him over supper, "The fishermen tell me the gulls come right up to you every morning." "They do," the young man said. "That is remarkable," said his father. "I have never seen anything like it. Tomorrow, catch a few of them and bring them home. I would love to see them up close." The young man agreed. It seemed harmless enough. The birds were everywhere. He could simply reach out and take one by the wing. The next morning, he walked down to the shore as he always did. He sat on the same rocks. He breathed the same salt air. The sun rose as it always rose, pale gold over the water. And the gulls came, circling. But something was different. They circled above him, calling to each other, wheeling in wide arcs. And they did not land. He sat there for an hour, then two. The gulls kept their distance. They dipped and banked and cried out from the sky, but not a single bird touched down anywhere near him. Nothing about the shore had changed. The rocks were the same. The tide was the same. The young man looked exactly as he had always looked. But something in him had shifted. He had come to the water's edge that morning with a purpose. He had come to take something. And whatever the birds sensed in him, whatever invisible thing had changed behind his eyes, it was enough. They could feel the reach in him, even though his hands never moved. He sat there all morning, and the gulls never came. In the days that followed, the young man told his father he could not bring the birds home. "They will not come to me anymore," he said. "What did you do differently?" his father asked. "Nothing," the young man said. He was quiet for a moment. "I sat on the same rocks. I looked the same, but I had already decided to take something from them. And somehow, they knew." It took many mornings before the gulls returned. The young man had to sit again and again at the water's edge, this time with no agenda at all, wanting nothing from the birds, expecting nothing. Slowly, one by one, over the course of weeks, they began to land near him again. First on the far rocks, then closer. Then, one dawn, on his open hand. This is what happens with peace. The moment we reach for it, it lifts away. The moment we try to capture the feeling, to hold it, to take it home and keep it, it circles overhead and will not land. This is not because peace is fragile or elusive. It is because reaching is exactly the opposite of what peace requires. Peace asks for open hands. It asks for a heart that has stopped grasping. And grasping and calm cannot live in the same breath. One is tension, the other is release. The fist and the open palm cannot be the same hand in the same moment. Think about what happens when you try to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. Trying to sleep is a kind of reaching, and the reaching itself produces the very wakefulness you want to escape. Sleep comes when you give up on it. Sleep comes when the effort drops away and the body remembers what it already knows how to do. The same trap hides inside so many of our attempts to relax. A person plans a vacation for months, and when it finally arrives, spends the whole week monitoring whether it is relaxing enough, whether the rest is being properly achieved, whether the money and the time are paying off in measurable calm. The vacation becomes a project. The rest becomes a performance with a standard to meet. And the checking, the measuring, the managing is itself the tension that keeps the rest away. The gulls circle overhead the entire trip and never land. Peace works differently. It is something the mind already knows and only needs to stop preventing. The instruction is never achieve calm. The instruction is, as Ajahn Amaro said, simply notice what disturbs the calm that is already here. There is a difference between those two instructions that is easy to miss but changes everything. One points outward toward a goal. The other points inward toward a recognition. One says the journey is long. The other says the destination is under your feet. The Sufi saint Rabia of Basra, who lived in what is now Iraq in the 8th century, once offered a teaching that has been told and retold for over 1,000 years. One evening at dusk, Rabia's neighbors found her outside her small house, down on her hands and knees in the dusty street, searching the ground with great concentration. "Rabia, what are you looking for?" one of them asked. "My sewing needle," she said. "I have lost it, and I need it for my work." Several neighbors knelt down to help. They spread out across the street, brushing the dust with their hands, peering at every crack and pebble. But the street was wide and the light was fading, and a needle is a very small thing. After some time, one of the neighbors straightened up and said, "Rabia, we have been searching a long while. Can you tell us where you dropped it? If we knew the spot, we could look more carefully." Rabia did not look up. "I dropped it inside my house," she said. The neighbors stopped and stared at her. "Inside your house? Then why are we searching out here in the street?" "Because," Rabia said, still on her hands and knees, "there is more light out here." For a moment, the neighbors did not know what to say. And then Rabia looked up at them and said, very simply, "This is exactly what you do every day. You have lost something inside yourselves, and you search for it everywhere else, because the light seems better out in the world. But the needle is not out here. It never was." The neighbors stood in the fading dusk, hands still dusty, and something in Rabia's words reached them. She was not scolding. She was pointing. The thing you are looking for, the ease, the rest, the feeling of being whole, is not at the end of the next purchase, or the next accomplishment, or the next rearrangement of your circumstances. It is where you left it. It is inside. And it is easy to see why the street is so tempting. The outer world is bright and busy and full of promising corners to check. The inner world can seem dim by comparison, unfamiliar, even a little uncomfortable at first. Most of us have spent our whole lives becoming experts at looking outward and hardly an hour learning to look the other way. So the search stays in the street, year after year, because that is where the light is, and because everyone else is searching there too, and it feels almost rude to stop. Rabia's kindness was to interrupt the whole crowd at once, and to do it with a needle. This is the first great teaching of the Buddhist path, and it is also, somehow, the last one. The peace you are searching for is not something you have to earn. It is not a reward for enough practice, or enough patience, or enough suffering. It is the nature of the mind itself, present from the very beginning, closer than your own breath. The search itself can become the obstacle. Every tradition says this, in its own way. The Zen masters say it with their koans and their direct pointing. The Sufi poets say it with their longing for the beloved who was never absent. The Buddha said it when he taught the 4 foundations of mindfulness and described them as the direct way, the way that leads home, the way that is already here. There is almost a comedy to it. We run and run and run, and the thing we are running toward is the ground beneath our running feet. We strain our eyes at the horizon, and the treasure is in our pocket. But there is also a deep kindness in it, because it means that peace is not reserved for the gifted, or the disciplined, or the lucky. It is not a rare state that only a few can reach. It belongs to everyone. It is everyone's birthright. The monk in the mountain temple and the parent falling asleep on the couch after a long day have the same ground beneath them. The same stillness is available to both. And what about the moments when the stillness seems entirely gone, when the mind is loud and troubled and nothing feels at ease? Ajahn Amaro's instruction has an answer for this too, and it is wonderfully undramatic. Be attentive to what disturbs the peace. Nothing more than that. When a disturbance comes, and disturbances will always come, the practice is simply to know it as a disturbance. A worry is passing through. A tension is passing through. The knowing does not fight the disturbance, and it does not follow it out the door either. It just watches the visitor arrive and, in time, watches the visitor leave. The house itself never went anywhere. The peace was disturbed at the surface and untouched underneath, in the same way weather crosses a mountain without ever moving the mountain. The practice, then, has nothing to do with building something new. It is a recognition of what was never missing. It is sitting at the water's edge with open hands. It is bringing the search back inside, where the needle has been waiting all along. In ordinary life, this looks simpler than we expect. It might look like taking a breath before responding to a difficult message. It might look like noticing, in the middle of planning tomorrow, that right now, in this exact moment, nothing is actually wrong. It might look like the moment just before sleep, when the day's noise finally falls away, and something underneath it, something that was there the whole time, becomes briefly audible. That something is not special. It is not dramatic. It does not glow or hum or announce itself. It is more like the silence between sounds, or the space between thoughts. Ordinary, steady, always present. The natural state of a mind that has stopped chasing. Ajahn Amaro's instruction ends where it begins. Allow the mind to rest in its natural ease. Then stay there. Simply be attentive to anything that arises to disturb that ease. The ease does not need to be created, and it does not need to be earned, and there is no future date on which it is scheduled to arrive. Stay there. It is already here. So for now, for just this breath, see what it is like to stop looking for peace, and instead, notice what is already at rest. There may be sounds in the room. There may be thoughts moving through the mind. Let them move. Beneath them, beneath the surface ripple of thinking and planning and remembering, there is something steady. Something that does not need to be fixed or improved or achieved. It has been here the whole time, the way the floor of a lake is always there beneath the waves. There is no work to do right now. There is nowhere to arrive. There is only this breath and the one after it, and the stillness that holds them both. Whenever you are ready, we will continue together. The old teachers of the Buddhist tradition sometimes describe craving as trying to catch smoke with your hands. You reach for it, and it curls away between your fingers. You reach again, and again, there is nothing to hold. The experience was real. The warmth of the fire was real. But the thing you tried to grasp was never solid. It was always passing. This is the nature of every experience. A pleasant feeling arises, and the mind reaches for it. An unpleasant feeling arises, and the mind pushes against it. Both movements are a kind of grasping, one pulling in, the other shoving away, and both are a kind of struggle. And here is what the Buddha saw with such clarity and placed at the very center of his teaching. The struggle itself is the suffering. The suffering was never in the feeling, or the event, or the content of what is happening. The suffering is the wrestling. Pain arrives in a life. Loss arrives. Difficulty arrives. These things are unavoidable, but the suffering that wraps itself around them, the tightness, the resistance, the story of how this should not be happening, that is something added. It is the second layer, and it is optional. This is an extraordinary claim, and it deserves to be explored slowly, because it does not mean that pain does not matter, or that grief is an error, or that the right response to hardship is to pretend it is not there. It means something more specific and more liberating than that. It means that when we stop fighting what is present, the suffering loosens. When we stop pulling and pushing, something opens. When the fist unclenches, there is a hand underneath it, and the hand is at rest. The Thai forest master Ajahn Chah put the whole matter in one sentence. He said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace." He was not describing a technique. He was describing a simple relationship, as reliable as water running downhill. The amount of struggle and the amount of suffering rise and fall together. Loosen one, and the other loosens with it. Aesop, the ancient Greek teller of fables, left behind a story that travelers later carried far to the east, where it found a new home in the mountains. In one old telling, it goes like this. A young monk was traveling along a narrow mountain path to reach a monastery high above the tree line. He was strong, proud of his endurance, and accustomed to clearing any obstacle through sheer effort. He had crossed swollen rivers by wading straight into them. He had climbed walls of rock that other travelers walked around. Effort had never failed him, and he had come to believe it never would. Halfway up the path, he came upon something lying across the trail. It was a strange, dark knot of root or stone, about the size of a fist. He nudged it with his walking staff. To his surprise, instead of rolling away, it swelled to twice its original size. He struck it harder. The knot doubled again. Now it was as large as a boulder, blocking the entire path. He swung his staff with all his strength, again and again. Each blow made the thing grow larger. Within minutes, the knot filled the passage from wall to wall, and the young monk could not take a single step forward. He stood there, panting, furious, his staff raised for another swing. "You might want to put that down," said a voice from above. He looked up. An old hermit nun was sitting on a ledge above the path, legs crossed, watching him with something between sympathy and amusement. "What is this thing?" the monk demanded. "It is called struggle," she said. "It has been on this path for a very long time. Many travelers have come this way, and many have done exactly what you did. Then how does anyone get past?" "They walk around it," she said. "Or they wait, and it shrinks. It has a peculiar nature. Left alone, it withers until it is no larger than a pebble. But every time someone strikes it, it feeds on the blow and grows." The monk looked at the enormous knot filling the path. He looked at his staff. Slowly, he lowered it. "The strongest travelers," the nun added, "are the ones who learn that some things cannot be defeated by force. The road opens when you stop fighting what is on it." The young monk sat down on a rock and waited. It was not easy for him. His hands kept wanting the staff. His whole body was trained for pushing, and sitting still while an obstacle blocked his way went against every habit he had. But he stayed. Over the next hour, the knot slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shrink. By the time the sun had moved a hand's width across the sky, it was small enough to step over. He continued up the path, leaving his staff leaning against the wall behind him. It is said that in his later years, when he had become a teacher himself, he kept no staff at all. When new arrivals asked him why, he would only smile and say that he had left it on a mountain path long ago, and that it was the best trade he ever made. The fable is saying more than "do not fight." It is saying that struggle has a nature, and that nature is to grow when fed. Think about a worry. A small worry, left alone, often dissolves on its own. But a small worry attacked, analyzed, argued with, turned over and over in the mind, becomes enormous. It fills the entire path. It blocks everything else from view. And the blocking itself produces more worry, which produces more effort, which produces more blocking. The cycle tightens, and the mind becomes cloudier and cloudier, less able to see clearly, more trapped in its own wrestling. The same thing happens in the body. An ache in the shoulder, met with clenching, throbs harder. A restless night, met with frustration at the restlessness, becomes a fully sleepless one. Anyone who has lain awake at 2 a.m, furious about being awake, knows exactly how the knot on the path behaves. The fury is the striking. The wakefulness feeds on every blow. The Buddha taught that this is exactly how suffering deepens. Clinging does not only hurt, it also clouds the mind that is doing the clinging. A mind caught in struggle cannot see clearly, and a mind that cannot see clearly struggles more. The trap feeds itself. But the reverse is also true. The moment the struggle loosens, even slightly, the mind clears. And a mind that clears a little can see a little more. And seeing more, it relaxes further. And relaxing further, it clears again. This is the spiral that moves toward freedom. It begins with one moment of letting go. The path of least resistance sounds, in ordinary speech, like an excuse. In this teaching, it means something else entirely. It means the direct path. Everything else is complication. One distinction keeps this teaching honest. Letting go is different from pushing down. Suppression is just struggle wearing a disguise. When a feeling is shoved into the basement and the door held shut, the holding is itself a fight, and the fight goes on underground, draining strength, waiting for a moment of tiredness to burst back up. Letting go does the opposite. It leaves the door open. The feeling is allowed to be exactly where it is, felt fully, and given room. And things that are given room behave like the knot on the path. They stop growing. They begin, at their own pace, to shrink. In old Japan, a man who had spent his entire life mastering the art of tea served in the household of a great lord. He had no skill with weapons. He had never held a sword. His gift was something else entirely, the ability to bring such complete and undivided presence to the act of preparing tea that anyone who watched him felt the room grow still. The Lord valued him so highly that he was given the formal robes and rank of a samurai whenever they traveled together, so that he would be treated with the respect his station deserved. On one visit to the capital, the tea master was walking through the streets in these borrowed robes when he accidentally brushed the shoulder of a swordsman. The swordsman turned, saw the robes, and assumed the man before him was a warrior. "You have insulted me," the swordsman said. "We will settle this with swords, tomorrow at dawn." The tea master bowed and apologized, but the swordsman would not relent. A formal challenge had been issued, and in that era, it could not be refused. That night, the tea master went to the household's fencing instructor, a man who had spent decades studying the art of the sword. "I have never held a blade in my life," the tea master said. "Tomorrow, I will face a man who has trained for years. I have no hope of prevailing. Can you teach me, at the very least, how to meet the morning with composure?" The fencing master listened. Then he said something unexpected. "Before I teach you anything, I would like you to prepare tea for me one last time." The tea master, confused but unable to refuse, set about the familiar ritual. He laid out the mat. He arranged the cups. He heated the water. He measured the leaves. And as he did so, something happened that the fencing master was watching for very carefully. All fear left the tea master's face. His hands were perfectly steady. His breathing was even. His attention was total. There was nothing in him but the act he was performing. No past. No future. No self-consciousness. Just pure, undivided presence. The fencing master watched until the last cup was poured. Then he said, "That is all you need. I do not understand. Tomorrow, when you face the swordsman, do not think about the sword. Do not think about winning or losing. Simply bring the same mind to the encounter that you bring to the tea. Prepare yourself as you prepare the room. Fold your robe as you fold the cloth. Hold the blade as you hold the kettle. Stand as you stand when you are pouring." The tea master did not sleep that night, but he understood. At dawn, he walked to the meeting place. The swordsman was there, ready, sword drawn. The tea master bowed, slowly and courteously, exactly as he bowed before beginning the tea ceremony. He folded his outer robe with the same care he folded the tea cloth. He drew the sword he had been lent and raised it above his head, as the fencing master had shown him. Then he stood, perfectly still, eyes half closed, breathing evenly. The swordsman stared at him. He had expected a trembling wreck. Instead, he saw a man who was completely present, completely settled, without a trace of fear or struggle. The swordsman had faced many opponents in his life, but he had rarely seen such stillness. For a long time, neither man moved. Then the swordsman lowered his blade bowed deeply, asked forgiveness, and walked away. What happened in that encounter was not a trick. The tea master did not deceive anyone. He did not pretend to be something he was not. He simply stopped struggling. He stopped resisting what was happening. He stopped fighting the fear, and in stopping, the fear had nothing to feed on. What was left was presence. Complete, undivided presence in the moment, as it actually was. And here is what makes the story so useful. The tea master did not overcome his situation by leaving it alone, the way the young monk left the knot alone. He entered it fully. He walked straight into the morning he dreaded, carrying nothing but the mind he had trained at the tea table. These are the two faces of the same teaching. Some difficulties shrink when we stop striking them. Others ask to be entered completely, without reservation, without one foot out the door. What both have in common is the end of resistance. The knot and the swordsman were defeated by the same thing, a person who had stopped fighting. In daily life, the swordsmen we face are smaller, but just as real. The argument we rehearse in our heads for hours. The insult we replay until it towers over everything else in the day. The difficult conversation we dread for a week, bracing and rehearsing, only to find that the conversation itself takes 10 minutes and the week of bracing was where all the suffering lived. These are all forms of struggle. And the struggle itself, as the Buddha taught, is the suffering. The content of the situation is one thing. The wrestling with it is another. When the wrestling stops, what remains is often surprising. The difficulty may still be there, but without the struggle wrapped around it, it is smaller than we thought. It is the size it actually is, instead of the size our fighting made it. We can see it clearly. We can respond to it simply. We can, in many cases, step over it. Ajahn Chah's sentence completes itself in a way he did not need to say aloud, because his listeners could finish it themselves. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. That is the whole path, folded into a single line. Everything else the tradition offers, every practice, every story, every teaching, is a way of getting back to this one simple movement. Stop adding the second layer. Let the knot on the path do what it does when left alone. It shrinks, the road opens, and the walking continues. In the texture of an ordinary evening, this might live as simply as this: a sound you did not expect, a thought you would rather not have, a memory that surfaces uninvited. And instead of bracing against it, instead of launching the old campaign to push it away or explain it or fix it, there is a breath. There is a noticing. Here is something arising, and here is the space around it. The space was always larger than the thing. That breath is the difference between the young monk swinging his staff and the young monk sitting down on the rock. That breath is the tea master raising the blade with the mind of pouring tea. That single moment of not struggling is where suffering begins to thin. And nothing about the moment needs to be special. It can happen while waiting in a line that will not move, while listening to a neighbor's music through the wall, while reading a message that stings. The circumstances stay ordinary. Only the response changes from striking to allowing, and the whole weight of the situation changes with it. It takes no effort at all. In fact, effort is exactly what it asks you to lay down. Rest here for a moment, in the space between what arrived and what comes next. There is no hurry. The path is open, and we will walk it together whenever you are ready. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha's great teaching on mindfulness, there is a phrase that appears at both the beginning and the end, framing everything between. He calls the practice the direct way for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow, for the destroying of pain and grief, for reaching the right path, for the realization of peace. The direct way. He could have called it the long way, or the hard way, or the way reserved for those who have prepared for a lifetime. He chose the word direct. And that single word carries a promise. The destination is not far off. What we are looking for does not sit on the other side of a vast distance. The journey and the arrival, if we listen carefully, may be much closer together than we have been imagining. This is the teaching we come to now, and it is perhaps the strangest and most beautiful of all, that awakening is not an arrival from somewhere else. It is a recognition of where you already are. It is coming home to a place you never left. In the Pali Canon, there is a story about a radiant visitor who appeared to the Buddha late one night in Jeta's grove. This visitor was not an ordinary traveler. His name, in a former life, had been Rohitasa, and he had been a seer of great power. In that distant life, he had possessed the ability to travel through the sky. His stride was immense. When he placed one foot on the shore of the Eastern Ocean, the other foot touched the western shore. His speed was beyond anything the human body could achieve, faster than a sharp-shooting archer's arrow crossing a wide plain. And Rohitasa had a single consuming desire. He wanted to reach the end of the world. He believed that somewhere, if he traveled far enough, he would find a place beyond birth and death, beyond sorrow and loss, a place where suffering simply did not exist. So he ran. He ran for 100 years. He ran without stopping, except to eat and sleep and attend to the bare necessities of a body. He ran with every measure of his supernatural speed, day after day, decade after decade, his eyes fixed on the horizon. And at the end of 100 years, he died. On the road, without having reached the end of the world. Now, reborn as a radiant being, he appeared before the Buddha and asked the question that had consumed his former life. Is it possible, by traveling, to reach the end of the world, a place where one does not suffer, does not age, does not die? The Buddha's answer was immediate and clear. It is not possible, friend, by traveling, to know or see or reach a far end of the world where one does not take birth, age, die, or pass away. Rohitasa nodded. He had learned this the hard way. 100 years of running had not brought him a single step closer. But then the Buddha said something else, something that changed everything. Yet I tell you that there is no making an end of suffering without reaching the end of the world. He paused. And I declare that it is just within this fathom-long body, with its perceptions and its thoughts, that there is the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world. Rohitasa stood very still. The answer he had been running toward for 100 years was not at the horizon. It was not at the edge of the cosmos. It was here, in this body, in this awareness, in this breath. The end of the world was not a place you could travel to. It was a seeing that could happen right where you stood. The entire search had been real. The longing had been real. But the direction had been wrong. He had been looking outward for something that could only be found inward. He had been running from home to find home. There is a pattern here that shows up everywhere, not only in Buddhist teaching, but in folk stories around the world. The traveler who circles the globe looking for a treasure that was buried under his own hearth. The dreamer who crosses mountains and deserts only to wake up in her own bed. The seeker who searches for years for a teacher and finds, at the end, that the lesson was in the first question she asked on the day she set out. The English poet T.S. Eliot captured it with extraordinary precision when he wrote that the end of all our exploring would be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. That single idea, that the journey's end is the journey's beginning, seen with new eyes, is the heartbeat of this teaching. And Glinda, in the old story of the Wizard of Oz, said it as simply as it can be said. You could have gone home any time you wanted. That story hides its deepest teaching in its frame. Dorothy falls asleep, and everything that follows, the strange land, the companions, the dangers, the long road to the great wizard who turns out to have no magic at all, happens inside her dream. The entire search takes place while she is lying safely in her own bed. She crosses an imagined world to find a way back to a home she never physically left. And when she wakes, the journey dissolves, and the bed and the window and the familiar faces are simply there, as they were all along. The search was real as an experience. The distance was never real at all. That is the mind's situation exactly. The wandering happens in thought, in memory, in worry, in plans, and all the while the body sits here, breathing, present, home. There is something almost frustrating about this. If the answer was here all along, why did we have to search? If peace is the mind's natural state, why did we have to suffer its absence? Why does Roitasa have to run for 100 years before someone tells him the world is in his own body? The answer, perhaps, is that the running is how we learn to stop. The searching is how we discover that the searcher is the thing we were looking for. We have to go around the world once before we can see our own doorstep clearly. The journey is not wasted. It simply ends where it begins, with this breath, this body, this present moment, and a recognition that feels less like discovery and more like remembering. The 9th century Chinese Zen teacher Qingyuan Weixin described his own journey in 3 stages, and his description has been passed down through the centuries because it captures something so universal that almost anyone who has practiced deeply recognizes it at once. He said, "Before I had studied Zen for 30 years, I saw mountains as mountains and rivers as rivers. This is ordinary perception. The world looks the way the world looks. A mountain is a mountain. A river is a river. A cup of tea is a cup of tea. Everything is solid, fixed, exactly what it appears to be. This is where we all begin." When I arrived at a more intimate knowledge, Qingyuan continued, I came to the point where I saw that mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. This is the second stage, the stage of deep looking. Everything we thought was solid begins to shimmer. The self we thought was permanent turns out to be a process. The world we thought was fixed turns out to be flowing. Every certainty dissolves. This stage can feel disorienting, even frightening. The ground beneath the feet seems to give way. Nothing is what it seemed. But now that I have got its very substance, Qingyuan said, I am at rest. For it is just that I see mountains once again as mountains, and rivers once again as rivers. This is the homecoming. The mountain is still a mountain. The river is still a river. The cup of tea is still a cup of tea. Nothing has changed on the surface, but something has changed in the seeing. The person who looks at the mountain now is not the same person who looked at it before. She has passed through the dissolution and come back, and what she finds on the other side is the ordinary world, just as it always was, but seen for the first time without the veil of assumption, without the weight of, this is mine, and this must last, and this must be different than it is. The third stage looks exactly like the first stage, but it is not the first stage. It is the first stage seen with eyes that have traveled and returned. Mountains are mountains again, but now that simple fact is enough. More than enough. It is everything. And the middle stage, unsettling as it is, cannot be skipped. A person cannot leap from the first mountains to the third mountains by deciding to. The dissolving years are what wash the assumptions out of the seeing, and assumptions do not rinse out quickly. Anyone who tries to claim the third stage without passing through the second is really just standing in the first with new vocabulary. This is why Qing Yuan gave the honest number, 30 years. The number is not a threat. It is a reassurance. It means that the confusion of the middle passage, when nothing feels solid and the old certainties are gone, is not a wrong turn. It is the road itself doing exactly what the road does. A young novice once asked an old mountain teacher what all his decades of practice had given him. In the beginning, the old teacher said, I looked at the rain falling on the temple roof, and I thought it was just rain. And now? The novice asked. He smiled. Now I look at the rain falling on the temple roof, and I see that it is just rain. Then what changed? The one who looks, he said. Coming home is not the same as never having left. The Rohitasa who hears the Buddha's teaching is not the Rohitasa who set out running 100 years ago. He could not have heard those words then. He needed the running. He needed the failure. He needed to wear out the belief that the answer was elsewhere before he could hear that the answer was here. But the here was always here. That is the part that catches in the chest. The peace he was running toward had been present in his body the whole time, in his perceptions and his thoughts, in the rising and falling of his breath. He just could not see it while he was running. You cannot read a letter while sprinting. You have to stop first. And this is what practice is. Practice is the stopping. Practice is the standing still long enough to see what was underfoot the whole time. Practice is Rohitasa, sitting down at last and discovering that the world, the whole world, is contained in this 1 fathom-long body, right here. There is a phrase the masters use for this that sounds like a riddle at first. No one ever left. It means that the person who supposedly wandered away from peace, the exile trying to get back, never actually existed as an exile. The body never departed from the present moment. It cannot. The body is always exactly here, breathing this breath, touching this ground. Only attention travels. Attention flies out to old regrets and future fears, and from out there, it sends back reports of how far away home is. But home was never far. The distance was made of thought, and thought is the one thing that can dissolve in an instant. The moment attention returns to the body, the exile ends, because there was never anyone standing outside the door. There was only a door that had not been noticed, and it was open the whole time. It is not that the search was a mistake. The search was necessary. But the search ends, as all honest searches do, with a recognition so simple, it is almost embarrassing. The thing was here. It was always here. There was never a moment when it was not here. And with that recognition comes something that is hard to name but easy to feel. A kind of settling, a kind of exhale. The shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches, the eyes soften. The searching energy, which has been pushing everything forward for so long, has nowhere left to go. It pools. It rests. It becomes available for something other than seeking. This is what the masters mean when they say that awakening is not an experience. It is the end of the argument with what is. It is the end of the long campaign to be somewhere else. It is the simple, almost absurdly simple, act of being where you are and finding that it is enough. In ordinary life, this homecoming can happen in the smallest of moments. It can happen when you are washing a dish and suddenly the warmth of the water and the weight of the plate and the sound of your own breathing fill the entire world, and there is nowhere else to be. It can happen when you are lying in bed and the day is finally over, and instead of replaying it or rehearsing tomorrow, you simply feel the sheets and the pillow and the darkness, and something in you says, yes, here. It does not last. It does not need to last. It is not a permanent state to be captured and maintained. It is a recognition that can happen in any moment, because every moment contains it. The present is always available. Home is always here. Travelers sometimes describe the strange sweetness of the first evening back after a long trip, when the most ordinary things, the creak of a particular stair, the smell of one's own kitchen, seem briefly luminous. Nothing in the house changed. The absence changed the eyes. Practice offers that same returning sweetness without requiring the trip, because the absence it ends is only ever a few thoughts deep. And the beautiful thing is that you do not need to be a sky-walking seer with 100-year stride to find it. You do not need to dissolve mountains or sit in caves. You need only to stop for one breath and notice where you are. You need only to let the searching rest for one moment and see what is already beneath it. There is no place like home, and home is not a place. It is this. Whatever this is, right now, this is it. So for now, let this breath be the doorstep. Let this moment be the arrival. If the mind has been traveling, let it set down its bag. If there has been a search going on, let it rest. Mountains are mountains. Rivers are rivers. This breath is this breath, and the one breathing it has been home the whole time. Take as long as you like here. We will continue together whenever the next step feels natural. In his very first teaching at the deer park, the Buddha named the root of human unrest. He called it craving, a thirst that always leans toward what is not yet here. And in daily life, that thirst most often speaks in the voice of a bargain. The bargain goes something like this: once this one thing is settled, then I will be at ease. Once this one difficulty is removed, then I will rest. Once this one longing is fulfilled, then I will be happy. It is a reasonable bargain. It sounds perfectly sensible every single time the mind makes it. The problem is not that the bargain is illogical. The problem is that it renews itself forever. The moment one condition is met, another takes its place. The finish line moves. The one last thing becomes the next last thing, and the next, stretching out ahead like fence posts along a road with no end. This is one of the most important patterns the Buddhist tradition asks us to see. Not because wanting things is wrong, and not because we should feel guilty for having preferences and plans, but because the postponement of happiness is itself a kind of suffering. As long as peace is conditional, as long as it depends on something that has not yet happened, it is always on the other side of a door we have not walked through. And the door keeps moving. The bargain comes in two forms, and each hides in its own way. The first says, "If I get this one thing, then I will be happy." The second says, "If I get rid of this one thing, then I will be happy." One is grasping, the other is aversion. They look different, but they are the same movement. They are the mind saying, "Not here, not now, not yet. Somewhere else, something else." Then, part of what makes the bargain so durable is that it is never entirely false. Getting the thing does bring relief. For an hour, a day, sometimes a season, the wanting goes silent, and that silence feels like the happiness we were promised. So the mind draws the obvious conclusion: getting things works. It just picked the wrong thing this time, or too small a thing, and the next one will finally hold. What the mind does not see is that the relief never came from the thing at all. It came from the brief absence of wanting. For a moment, there was nothing to lean toward, and in that moment, the mind tasted its own natural rest, then immediately credited the purchase, the promotion, the solved problem. The lesson gets learned backwards every single time. And so, the chase continues, funded by evidence that was pointing the other way all along. And meanwhile, here is perfectly available. Now is happening. The breath is moving. The body is resting. Life is unfolding in this moment, and the mind is somewhere down the road, negotiating its next condition for peace. Long ago, beside an eastern sea, a fisherman and his wife lived in a small hut near the water. The fisherman was a simple man. He went out every morning with his line and his hook and sat by the water, and most days he caught enough to eat and was satisfied. One morning, he pulled in a large carp, golden-scaled and strange, and as he held it over the side of the boat, the carp spoke to him. "I am not an ordinary fish," the carp said. "I am an old spirit of the sea. If you let me go, I will grant you whatever you wish." The fisherman was startled. He had no particular wish in mind. He put the carp back in the water and watched it disappear beneath the surface. Then he went home and told his wife what had happened. "And you asked for nothing?" She said, "What should I have asked for?" She looked around their small hut with its leaking roof and crooked walls. "You could have asked for a proper cottage. Go back and ask." The fisherman did not want to go, but his wife insisted, and so he walked back to the shore and called out over the water. The carp rose to the surface. "My wife would like a cottage," the fisherman said. "Go home," said the carp. "She has it already." And when the fisherman returned, the hut was gone, and in its place stood a snug little cottage with a thatched roof and flowers by the door. His wife was sitting on a bench in the sun, and for a moment she looked content. But only for a moment. Within a few days, the cottage felt small. "Go back," she said. "Ask for a fine house of stone, with a courtyard and a garden." The fisherman went. The sea was darker than before, green and churning. The carp granted the wish, The cottage became a great house, and his wife sat in the courtyard among the fruit trees. But the great house was not enough either. She wanted a palace. Then she wanted to be governor. Then she wanted to rule the province. Each time, the fisherman walked to the shore and called the carp. Each time, the sea was darker, more troubled, the sky lower and more bruised. Each time, the wish was granted. And each time, before the sun had set on the new arrangement, his wife was already restless, already looking at the next thing, already composing the next condition for her happiness. Finally, she told her husband she wanted to command the sun and the moon. The fisherman walked to the water one last time. The sea was black. The wind was howling. He could barely get the words out. The carp listened, and then it said, very simply, "Go home." When the fisherman returned, the palace was gone. The province was gone. The great house and the courtyard and the cottage with the flowers were all gone. There was only the old hut, exactly as it had always been, with its leaking roof and crooked walls. His wife sat inside, and the sea was calm. They sat together in the silence of the small room, and for the first time in a long while, they could hear the waves. This story is not about greed, really. It is about the shape of wanting. Each wish feels perfectly reasonable in the moment it arises. A cottage instead of a hut? Of course. A stone house instead of a cottage? Why not? Each step on the ladder makes sense from the rung below. But the ladder has no top. There is always a rung above the one you are standing on, and as long as the mind is climbing, it cannot rest. The fisherman's wife is not a villain. She is the human mind, doing what the human mind does. She is the voice in all of us that says, "This is good, but it would be better if." She is the internal negotiator who attaches conditions to peace and then, the moment the conditions are met, writes new ones. And the sea in the story deserves its own moment of attention. With every wish, the water grows darker, rougher, more troubled, until the final request is shouted into a howling storm. The old tellers of this tale understood something precise. The sea is not punishing anyone. The sea is the wanting itself, made visible. A mind climbing the ladder of conditions is never a calm mind, because each new rung raises the stakes and sharpens the fear of losing what the last rung delivered. The bigger the holdings, the wilder the weather. And when the wanting finally exhausts itself, the story does not describe a battle or a lesson delivered in anger. It simply says the sea grew calm. The storm was only ever the wish. And the carp's final answer is not a punishment. It is a returning. It is the teaching itself, delivered in the only language the story can manage. You end up where you started. The hut is the hut. The sea is the sea. The breath is the breath. And the question that remains, the only question that ever mattered, is, can you hear the waves? Some 23 centuries ago, in the Greek city of Corinth, there lived a man who had already stepped off the ladder entirely. When Alexander of Macedon was a young ruler preparing to lead his armies across the known world, he traveled to the city of Corinth, where a general assembly was being held in his honor. Statesmen and philosophers came from every corner of Greece to pay their respects. They brought gifts and praise and offers of service. Everyone wanted to be seen by the most powerful man alive. Everyone except one. A philosopher named Diogenes lived in Corinth at that time. He owned almost nothing. He spent his days in the open air, sitting in the sun, talking to anyone who stopped to listen, indifferent to wealth and power and reputation. He had no interest in assemblies or conquests or the favor of kings. Alexander, hearing about this man who would not come to him, decided to go to Diogenes instead. He found the philosopher lying on a patch of dry ground outside the city walls, basking in the morning light. Alexander stood over him with his retinue of soldiers and advisors. He introduced himself. He said he admired the philosopher's reputation, and then he made an extraordinary offer. "Ask me for anything," Alexander said. "Anything in the world. I have the power to grant it." Diogenes looked up at the young ruler, casting a shadow across his body. He squinted, and he said, "Yes, you could stand a little out of my sun." The soldiers behind Alexander began to murmur. Some were offended. Others were bewildered. But Alexander himself stood very still. Then he turned to his companions and said quietly, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." The conqueror of nations looked at the man on the ground and saw something he recognized. Diogenes already had what Alexander was marching across the world to find. He had peace. He had sufficiency. He had rest. And it had cost him nothing but the willingness to stop reaching. The distance between the fisherman's wife and Diogenes is the distance between the two forms of the bargain. The wife says, "When I have enough, I will rest." Diogenes says, "I already have enough." The wife looks at the next rung. Diogenes looks at the sun. The wife is always about to be happy. Diogenes is happy now. Consider what Alexander actually saw that morning. He was the most envied man in the world, and he spent his days surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Every face that approached him was a face mid-bargain, calculating, hoping, positioning. Then he stood over a man lying on the bare ground who wanted exactly one thing from the ruler of the known world, that he move slightly to the left. In that instant, Alexander was looking at the only person he had perhaps ever met who was not reaching. And some honest part of him recognized that this man, owning nothing, had arrived at the very place all the conquering was supposed to lead. The armies, the campaigns, the years of marching, all of it was aimed at a rest that the man in the sun was enjoying for free. This is not about poverty or simplicity as moral virtues. The Buddha himself taught the middle way, the path between indulgence and deprivation. It is about something subtler than that. It is about the moment the mind quits setting terms for its own rest. That moment can happen in a palace or in a hut. It can happen in the middle of a busy life, surrounded by responsibilities and plans. It does not require giving everything away or sleeping on the ground. It requires only one thing: noticing the bargain as it is being made. Noticing the voice that says "not yet" and asking, with some gentleness, "Why not now?" Because the mind that says, "After this, I will rest," is the same mind that will say, "After this," again and again and again. The negotiation never concludes. The terms are never satisfied. There is always one more rung, one more condition, one more thing standing between the self and its own ease. The only way off the ladder is to step off it. Not at the top. At whatever rung you are standing on right now. To look around and notice the sky and the air and the sound of waves, and to say, "This is enough. This, right here, is enough." In the quiet of an ordinary evening, the bargain is almost always running in the background. If I can just finish this task, then I will relax. If I can just get through this week, then things will be easier. If I can just solve this problem, then I will be at peace. And it may be true that the task needs finishing, and the week needs getting through, and the problem needs solving. None of that is in question. What is in question is the conditional, then. That little word, then, is where the suffering hides. Because then never arrives. It is replaced, instantly, by the next then. The rest it promises is always one step ahead. What if the rest were available now? Available during the task, in the middle of the unsolved problem, on a Tuesday night, in the thick of the week, right here, in this room, in this breath, with everything unfinished and unresolved and still somehow, underneath all of it, fundamentally all right. There is a practical side to this that the tradition points out again and again. Rest that waits for everything to be finished never arrives, because nothing is ever entirely finished. But rest, taken in the middle of things, changes the middle of things. A person who can settle for a few breaths between one task and the next brings a clearer eye to the next task. The work goes better, the decisions come cleaner, the patience lasts longer. Rest turns out to be the ground that good effort stands on, and postponing it until the effort is over gets the whole arrangement backwards. That is not wishful thinking. That is the ground of this entire practice. The Buddha did not teach that suffering ends when circumstances improve. He taught that suffering ends when the mind stops placing conditions on its own peace. The circumstances may improve or they may not. The breath continues either way. The waves continue either way. And the listening is available in every moment, finished or unfinished, resolved or unresolved. The carp sends the fisherman home. Diogenes asks the emperor to step aside. The instruction is the same. Look at what is already here. It has been here the whole time, patient as the sea itself, waiting only for the negotiating to pause. There is no rung left to climb. So let the bargaining mind rest for this moment. Let the list of conditions dissolve, just for now. There is nothing that needs to happen first. There is no prerequisite for this breath. The sun is already here, if only we stop standing in our own shadow. When you are ready, we will walk on together. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent. Everything that arises will pass away. Everything that is born will end. This is not a philosophy or an opinion. It is a description of what is happening in every moment, in every breath, in every sensation and thought and feeling. Nothing holds still. Nothing stays. For most of us, this teaching lands first as bad news. Impermanence sounds like a warning. It sounds like a reason to grieve, or to hold on tighter, or to be afraid. If everything passes, then nothing is safe. If nothing lasts, then nothing matters. If even the people we love and the lives we have built are temporary, then what is the point? But the Buddhist tradition says something unexpected about this. It says that impermanence, seen clearly, is not grim at all. It is freeing. It is the very thing that makes tenderness possible, that makes beauty possible, that makes each moment vivid and complete. The cherry blossom is not beautiful despite lasting only a week. It is beautiful because it lasts only a week. The sunset is not diminished by ending. The ending is part of what makes the watching so full. The difference between impermanence as despair and impermanence as freedom is not in the fact itself. The fact is the same. Everything passes. The difference is in how the fact is held. A nun in midlife once undertook a long winter retreat at a hermitage high on a plateau, far from any town. She had been practicing for many years, and she had come to this isolated place to sit with silence and stillness for several weeks. The days passed slowly. The sun rose and set over the flat, open landscape. The moon waxed and waned. She walked in the mornings and sat in the afternoons, and the hours moved through her like water through an open hand. There was little to mark one day from the next. The same kettle in the morning, the same path worn in the frost, the same wind arriving from the same direction in the late afternoon. In the beginning, the weeks ahead seemed vast, almost endless. And then, day by day, they folded in on themselves and disappeared. She would look up from her sitting and find that a third of the retreat was gone, then half, and she could not have said where it went. Somewhere around the middle of the retreat, during her walking meditation, a line from an old poem began to surface in her mind. It was a passage from Shakespeare, from the tragedy of Macbeth. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, creeps in this petty pace from day to day. She had memorized it as a student years ago, and now it returned unbidden, word by word. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. For several days, the poem haunted her. It rose during walking, during sitting, during the long grey evenings when the wind pressed against the walls of the hermitage. And it darkened her mood. The words seemed to confirm something she was already feeling, that the days were all the same, that they meant nothing, that the whole display of living was a shadow play signifying nothing. She sat with this heaviness for some time. And then, on one particular morning, something shifted. She was watching the sun come up over the plateau, the way she had watched it every morning for weeks. And the poem came again. Life's but a walking shadow. But this time, instead of heaviness, she felt something loosen. She felt something open. Because the words were true. Life was a walking shadow. It was a display that did not last. And that fact, which had pressed on her like a weight, suddenly felt like an opening. If the display did not last, then it did not need to be held. If it was a play of light and shadow, then it could be watched with wonder instead of dread. The impermanence that had seemed so grim was, from a slightly different angle, the very thing that made the watching free. She was not obligated to hold on to any of it. She was not failing by letting it go. The sunrise was beautiful, and it ended and another one came. The days were brief and they passed, and more days followed. Everything arose and everything fell away, and the falling away was not a catastrophe. It was the nature of the display. It was what displays do. She stood in the early light and looked out at the open land and felt, for the first time in weeks, at ease. The poem had not changed. The fact of impermanence had not changed. She had simply turned it over in her hands and found the other side. The nun on the plateau had been hearing those old lines one way for weeks. Everything passes, so nothing counts. But there is another way to hear them, and it changes everything. The passing is not personal. The display is not happening to you. You are part of the display. Most of the heaviness we carry about impermanence comes from a single assumption we never examine, that we are the main character, and everything that changes is changing at us. The years pass at me. The season ends on me. From inside that assumption, every passing is a small theft. But watch a sky full of moving clouds for a while, and the assumption loosens. The clouds are not doing anything to anyone. They are simply weather, forming and dissolving. And our days, our moods, even the long, slow changes of a life are weather too. When the sense of being the target drops away, what remains is the watching, and the watching is spacious. It has room for everything that comes and everything that goes. You are the light and shadow moving across the stage, and the stage itself, and the watching. And when the watching is free of grasping, when it stops trying to freeze the display or argue with its nature, then the sound and fury are a sign of aliveness. The display is astonishing. It has always been astonishing. We just could not see it while we were busy trying to hold it still. There is a world of difference between nothing matters because it all passes, and how extraordinary that any of this is here at all. Both responses arise from the same fact. One leads to despair. The other leads to a kind of gratitude so deep it does not need a reason. Music makes this plain. A melody is beautiful precisely because each note gives way to the next. If a single note were held forever, it would stop being music and become a drone, and eventually just a noise to escape. No one grieves the ending of each note as it passes. The passing is the song. And no one listens to a piece of music with the goal of arriving at the final chord. The listening is complete in every bar. A life works the same way, and so does an evening, and so does a breath. The movement is where the beauty lives. Freeze any of it, and the very thing we were trying to keep would be gone. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there is a practice that makes impermanence visible in a way no words can match. A group of monks will gather in a temple hall and spend days, sometimes weeks, creating an elaborate painting on a flat surface using nothing but grains of colored sand. The work is painstaking. Each grain is placed individually, tapped from the end of a narrow metal funnel, guided into position with extraordinary precision. Over the course of many days, a vast and intricate image emerges, geometric patterns radiating outward from a center, rich with color, alive with symbolism, beautiful beyond what photographs can convey. Visitors come to watch. They stand around the edges of the table and observe the monks bent over their work, hour after hour, placing grain after grain. The room is nearly silent except for the soft rasp of the metal funnels, a sound like distant crickets. The monks work so close to the surface that their breath must be controlled, because a single exhale in the wrong place could blur a line that took an hour to lay. The painting grows. A border appears, then an inner ring, then finer and finer details. By the end, the mandala is a masterwork, glowing with reds and golds and blues, as elaborate as a stained glass window laid flat. And then, at a closing ceremony, the monks take up small brushes and sweep it all away. The colors blend into a dull gray. The intricate patterns dissolve. In a matter of minutes, what took days or weeks to create is reduced to a heap of undifferentiated sand. The monks gather the sand into a vessel and carry it to the nearest flowing water, a river, a stream, a pond, and pour it in. The mandala enters the current and is carried away. At one such ceremony, a woman who had been watching the creation for days approached one of the monks as the sweeping began. Her eyes were full. "How can you do this?" she asked. "After all that work? After all that beauty?" The monk paused, and looked at her. It is beautiful, yes, and we are attached to it. That is natural, but it has to go. Everything has to go. The whole universe, the same. One day, everything has to go. He was quiet for a moment, then added, when you feel that strongly, really feel it. That feeling is itself the antidote to clinging. The sand entered the water. The current took it. The blessing, the monks explained, was now spreading outward through the world, carried by the river to wherever the river went. The mandala teaches something that the mind cannot learn through argument. It teaches it through the body, through the eyes, through the ache in the chest that arises when something beautiful is released. Impermanence is not an idea to be agreed with or disagreed with. It is a fact to be felt. And when it is felt fully, something extraordinary happens. The grasping loosens. The holding lets go. And what remains is not grief. What remains is a kind of tenderness for the whole passing show. At these ceremonies, many visitors raise their cameras as the sweeping begins, trying to save what the monks are releasing. It is such a human instinct, and the monks never object. But everyone who has ever tried it knows what the photograph turns out to be, a small flat record of something that was alive. The mandala was never really the pattern of sand. It was the days of devotion, the held breath, the hush in the room, the moment shared by everyone standing there. None of that fits in a picture, because none of it was ever an object. The camera tries to keep the sand. What mattered was the ceremony, and the ceremony can only be kept one way, which is to have been fully present while it happened. The cherry blossoms in Japan last about a week. The entire country turns out to see them, and the news reports track the opening of the flowers town by town, the way other countries track storms. Families spread blankets under the trees and eat and talk and watch the petals fall. They do not mourn the brevity. They celebrate it. The brevity is the celebration. If the blossoms lasted all year, no one would look up. It is the passing that makes the looking so full of love. This is what the Buddhist teaching on impermanence is really pointing toward. Everything matters, and it matters because everything is passing. This conversation matters because it will end. This breath matters because there will be a last one. This evening matters because it will not come again. There is a practice hidden inside that recognition, and it costs nothing. It is simply to remember, now and then, that every ordinary thing is being done some particular number of times. There is a last cup of tea with every friend, a last walk down every familiar street, a last evening of every kind, and almost none of them announce themselves. This sounds mournful until it is actually tried, and then it turns out to work in the opposite direction. The thought does not darken the tea. It wakes up the drinking of it. The most routine moment, held this way, becomes something a person actually attends, and attention, it turns out, was the ingredient that was missing all along. And the freedom in this, the liberation that the tradition promises, is that when we stop fighting the passing, when we stop trying to make things permanent that are not permanent, a weight lifts. The terrible seriousness that we bring to our experience, the sense that this is real stuff happening to a real me, and it had better go well, softens. The display is still the display. The light and shadow are still moving. But the watching has changed. It has become lighter, more open, more willing to let each moment be what it is, and then let it go. Life is a walking shadow, and the walking is magnificent. In daily life, impermanence is not usually seen on the scale of mountains and sunsets and mandalas. It is seen in the small things. A child's face changing month by month. A season turning. The sound of a voice you have not heard in a long time. The way a day that seemed endless at breakfast is suddenly, impossibly, evening. Parents know a version of this better than any philosopher. A stage of childhood that felt like it would last forever. The small hand in yours on every walk, the particular mispronounced word, simply stops one day, without a farewell, and its ending is only noticed weeks later, in hindsight. Nothing was lost in the way things are usually lost. It passed, as stages do, and made room for the next one. And the parents who suffer least over this are the ones who somehow knew it all along, and let the knowing sweeten the walks while the walks were happening. These are not occasions for sadness, although sadness may come with them, and that is all right too. They are occasions for presence, for showing up fully to the moment that is here, knowing that it is passing, and letting that knowledge make the showing up more vivid, more tender, more real. The sand mandala is being swept even now. The blossoms are falling even now. The sun that rose this morning has already set. And whatever this moment holds, it will not hold it for long. That is not a tragedy. That is the sound and fury and light and shadow of being alive. And it is enough. So let whatever is present be present, just as it is, just for now. A sound, a sensation, a feeling. It is arising, and it will pass, and there is nothing to hold on to, and nothing to push away. The display is here. Let it be here. We will continue together in a moment. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha gave an instruction about the breath that is almost startlingly simple. He said, breathing in a long breath, one knows, I am breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, one knows, I am breathing out a long breath. That is all. The instruction says nothing about changing the breath or making it deeper or slower or more rhythmic. Just know what is happening. Know the breath as it is. A long breath, known as long. A short breath, known as short. The knowing is the whole instruction. This same quality of bare knowing, of simply seeing what is present without adding anything to it, is what the Buddha brought to every corner of experience. Know the body as it is. Know the mind as it is. And know, with particular care, the feeling tone of each moment as it is. Feeling tone sits at the very center of the Buddhist understanding of suffering, and it is one of the most practical things the tradition has to offer. Every moment of experience, every sensation, every thought, every sound arrives with a flavor. It is either pleasant or unpleasant, or somewhere in between, a neutral tone that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. This tone is subtle. It arises before the mind has time to think about it, before any story is told, before any reaction is chosen. It is the first coloring of experience, and it happens faster than thought. And it is at this exact point, at this tiny hinge, that suffering is born. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha told a parable about a small bird and a hawk. Once, a quail was feeding in an open field, far from her usual ground. She had wandered out, drawn by something, perhaps the look of richer soil, perhaps curiosity, perhaps simply the pull that comes when something unfamiliar catches the eye. She was feeding in the open when a hawk dropped from the sky and seized her. As the hawk carried her upward, the quail cried out, "It is my own fault. I wandered out of my proper ground, my own ancestral territory. If I had stayed where I belong, this hawk would never have caught me." The hawk was curious. "What is your proper ground?" "A freshly plowed field," the quail said, "with clumps of earth all turned up." The hawk was confident. She had caught many birds and was certain of her own strength. She opened her talons and let the quail go. "Fly there, then. But even there, you will not escape me." The quail flew straight to the nearest plowed field and landed on top of the largest clump of turned earth. She settled her feathers and looked up at the sky. The hawk came. She folded her wings and dove. But the plowed field was uneven and broken, all ridges and hollows and hard clods. As the hawk came in fast, the quail slipped down behind the clump of earth, and the hawk's talons closed on nothing but cold soil. She pulled up, circled once, saw that there was no clean approach anywhere in that broken ground, and flew away. The quail, safe on her own ground, watched the hawk shrink into the distance. The Buddha told this story to his monks and then said, "Wander in what is your proper ground, your own ancestral territory. When you stay in your proper ground, Mara gains no opening, no foothold." And what is your proper ground? The 4 foundations of mindfulness. The parable is about straying. Not straying in space, but straying in attention. The quail was caught because she left her own ground, the ground of awareness, the ground of knowing what is present. And the moment she returned to it, the hawk could not touch her. Her safety was never a matter of strength or speed. On open ground, the hawk outmatched her completely. On her own ground, the contest simply could not happen. This is what happens with feeling tone. The pleasant arises, and the mind strays toward it. It reaches, it leans, it begins to grasp. "More of this," it says. "Hold this. Keep this." And in that straying, the hawk descends. Craving has an opening. Suffering has a foothold. The unpleasant arises, and the mind strays in the other direction. It recoils. It pushes. It braces. Get rid of this. End this. This should not be here. And again, the straying is the opening. The resistance itself is where suffering gains its grip. And then there is the neutral, the tone that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. This is the most overlooked of the 3, and in some ways the most important. When the feeling tone is neutral, the mind tends to go dull. It stops paying attention. It drifts. It falls into a kind of sleepiness, not physical sleepiness, but a dimming of awareness. And in that dimming, the mind wanders off its ground without even noticing it has left. Modern life has built entire industries at this hinge. The phone comes out at the first flicker of mild boredom in a waiting room. The snack cupboard opens at the faint edge of an uncomfortable feeling after a hard phone call. The mildly unpleasant tone of an unanswered question sends the hand reaching for any distraction within arm's length. None of these movements are decisions. They complete themselves before deciding ever gets a chance, which is exactly what makes the hinge so interesting. Anyone who has found themselves scrolling without any memory of picking up the phone has met the hinge in action. The reach happened at the level of feeling tone, below the surface of choice, and everything after it was just momentum. The hinge is tiny. The movement from knowing to grasping, from awareness to reaching, happens in a fraction of a second. But that fraction of a second is where the whole chain of suffering begins. If the hinge is seen, even once, the chain loses a link. If it is seen again, another link falls. This is the microscopic level of freedom, and it is available in every breath. The 9th century Chinese Zen master Dongshan was once approached by a monk during a bitterly cold winter at the monastery. The hall was unheated. The frost came through the walls. Practice went on regardless, sitting in the dark before dawn, the cold pressing against every surface of the body. When the cold comes like this, the monk asked Dongshan, how can we escape it? Dongshan said, why not go where there is no cold? The monk looked hopeful. Where is that place? Dongshan said, when it is cold, become one with the cold. When it is hot, become one with the heat. The monk did not understand. He turned the answer over, looking for the trick in it, and found none. He sat with the words for many days, through many more cold mornings, pulling his robes tighter, bracing his body against the chill, resenting it, arguing with it in his mind, wishing it away. And the cold was terrible the whole time, not because of the temperature, but because of the fighting. Then one morning, something changed. He was sitting in the hall before dawn, and the cold came as it always came. And instead of bracing against it, instead of the familiar tightening, he simply let it be cold. He did not try to make it go away. He did not tell himself it should be different. He did not argue with the fact of the frost. He let the cold be cold, all the way through, without resistance. And the suffering stopped. The cold did not stop. The temperature in the hall was exactly the same. But the war with the temperature ended. The second layer, the layer of fighting, dropped away. And what was left was just cold. Just sensation. Just this, arising and present, no more terrible than the feeling of cool water on the skin. He sat very still. The bell rang for the end of the sitting period, and he realized he had been completely at ease for some time. He was neither warm nor comfortable, and he was entirely at ease, all at once. Because ease, he understood now, had nothing to do with the conditions being right. It had to do with the fighting being over. Dongshan's teaching is not about endurance. It is not about gritting your teeth and bearing it. It is about something much more radical than that. It is about the discovery that the discomfort in any moment is almost always two things layered on top of each other. The first is the bare sensation, the actual physical or emotional event. The second is the resistance, the bracing, the story that says this should not be happening. The bare sensation, on its own, is usually much smaller than we think. A cold morning is a cold morning. A headache is a headache. A pang of sadness is a pang of sadness. These things rise and fall like everything else. They are impermanent. They are workable. They are not the end of the world. Even boredom, that most avoided of all weathers, changes completely under this kind of attention. Boredom is what the neutral tone feels like when the mind demands entertainment and the moment declines to provide it. Met with resistance, it is mildly unbearable, which is why the hand goes searching for something, anything, to end it. But met the way the monk met the cold, boredom turns out to have a flaw beneath it, and the flaw is simply stillness. The old meditators knew this well. Many of them described long stretches of practice in which nothing at all was happening, and described those stretches, in hindsight, as the doorway. What looked like nothing was the mind, at last, with no errand to run. But wrap them in resistance, and they become enormous. A cold morning becomes an injustice. A headache becomes a crisis. A pang of sadness becomes proof that something is fundamentally wrong with life. The resistance does not protect us from the sensation. It magnifies it. It turns a passing cloud into a permanent ceiling. The Buddha's teaching on feeling tone is the most precise tool in the entire tradition for seeing this movement as it happens. It says, in every moment, before any story begins, there is a tone. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That tone is just a tone. It is like a color or a temperature. It does not require anything from you. It does not demand that you chase it, or fight it, or fall asleep to it. It simply asks to be known. There is a reason the tradition aims its attention at this early point rather than further down the chain. A spark is easy to see and easy to let burn out. A house fire is another matter. By the time craving has grown into a full obsession, or aversion has hardened into resentment, working with it takes real strength and real time. But at the level of feeling tone, nothing has caught yet. There is only a flicker of pleasant or unpleasant, light as a change in the air. Seen at that stage, it asks for no battle at all. This is why the masters call this practice subtle rather than difficult. The work is small. It only has to happen early. And the knowing is enough. That is the extraordinary discovery at the heart of this teaching. The knowing itself, the simple act of seeing the tone as it arises, is enough to interrupt the chain. When the pleasant is known as pleasant without the reaching, the craving does not ignite. When the unpleasant is known as unpleasant without the bracing, the suffering does not thicken. When the neutral is known as neutral without the dimming, the awareness stays clear. This is the quail returning to her own ground. This is the monk sitting in the cold without fighting it. This is the breath, known as long or short, without anything added. In the flow of an ordinary evening, the hinge turns hundreds of times without being noticed. A sound outside the window, slightly unpleasant, and the body tenses before the mind has time to think. A memory surfaces, faintly pleasant, and the mind leans toward it, spinning out a thread of longing before anyone is aware it has begun. A stretch of time passes with nothing much happening, and the mind clouds over, drifting into a kind of haze that is neither sleep nor wakefulness. These are the three movements: reaching, pushing, dimming, and each one, in its own way, carries the mind off its ground. Each one is a tiny leaving of home. Conversations are full of these moments too. Someone offers a small criticism, and before their sentence has even finished, something in the chest has tightened, and the reply is already assembling itself. The unpleasant tone landed, the push began, and the words that follow are the push-wearing language. A person who can feel that first tightening, just feel it, before speaking, has found the hinge in the middle of ordinary talk. Often the reply that comes out after that one felt moment is a different reply. Softer, more accurate, less armored. The whole conversation bends around a single instant of knowing. This ordering surprises most people when they first watch it closely. We assume our stories come first and our feelings follow. He was rude, therefore, this tightness. But watched carefully, it usually runs the other way. The tone lands first, wordless and fast, and the story arrives afterward to explain it, dressed up as the cause. Half of our grievances are narration written in service of a flicker that had already happened. Seeing this even once changes a person's relationship to their own explanations. The explanations are often just the unpleasant tone, hiring a lawyer. The practice is not to stop the movements. They are natural. They arise on their own, and they will keep arising as long as there is a nervous system. The practice is simply to see them, to catch the reaching as it begins, to feel the push as it starts, to notice the dimming as it descends. Just that. Just the seeing. And in the seeing, something remarkable happens. The reaching does not complete itself. The push loses its force. The dimming lifts. The mind, having seen what was happening, returns to its own ground. The quail finds the ploughed field. The monk finds the cold without the war. And for one breath, or two, or 10, there is peace. The kind of peace that does not depend on conditions, because it was never about the conditions. It was about the seeing. So for now, if there is a feeling present in this moment, let it be known. It needs no judging, no analyzing, no changing. Just knowing. Pleasant, unpleasant, or somewhere between. There is a tone to this moment, as there is a tone to every moment, and the simple act of recognizing it is the whole practice. Nothing to fix, nothing to improve, nothing to escape. Only the knowing. That is the ancestral ground. That is where the hawk cannot follow. Let the breath be the breath. Let the tone be the tone. And let the knowing hold it all. Whenever you feel settled, we will move on together. In the Visuddhimagga, the great 5th century guide to the Buddhist path, the teacher Buddhaghosa described what anger does to the one who carries it. He compared the angry person to someone who picks up a glowing ember to strike another and burns his own hand first. The harm intended for someone else arrives at home before it ever leaves. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood words in the spiritual vocabulary. It is often confused with approval, as though forgiving someone means agreeing that what they did was acceptable. Or it is confused with forgetting, as though forgiving means pretending the hurt never happened. Or it is seen as a gift to the person who caused harm, a kind of pardon issued from a position of moral authority. But in the Buddhist understanding, forgiveness is none of these things. Forgiveness is the act of putting down the ember. It is done for the one holding it. The heat does not care about justice or fairness or whether the other person deserves relief. The heat simply burns the hand that grips it, and the burning does not stop until the hand opens. Then why do we keep holding it? Because the grip feels like it is accomplishing something. Somewhere below words, the mind believes that staying angry keeps the score alive, that the resentment is a form of leverage, that letting go would mean the other person got away with it. It can even feel like loyalty, as if releasing the grievance would betray the one who was hurt. These beliefs are sincere, and they are mistaken about one thing. The ember is not connected to the other person at all. They do not feel its heat. They may not think of the matter from one year to the next. The entire transaction, the holding, the burning, the vigilance, takes place in one hand only, and it was ours the whole time. This is why forgiveness matters so much in the context of peace. Because a mind that refuses to forgive is a mind at war. And a mind at war, no matter how justified the war may seem, cannot rest. The refusal to forgive is not a fortress. It is a prison, and the person locked inside it is the one who built the walls. Two brothers once farmed side by side in a wide river valley. For 40 years, they shared everything. They lent each other tools and traded labor at harvest time. Their children grew up running between the two homesteads as though the boundary between them did not exist. Then one spring, a disagreement arose. It began with something small, as these things always do. A misunderstanding about a shared irrigation channel that ran between their fields. Words were said. More words followed. The disagreement hardened. The two brothers, who had shared 40 years of daily kindness, stopped speaking. The elder brother, nursing his anger, hired a carpenter who happened to be passing through the valley. He showed the carpenter a pile of timber beside his barn and pointed across the creek that ran between the two properties. "My brother's land is on the other side," he said. "I want you to build a fence along this creek. A tall fence. I do not want to see his fields. I do not want to see his house. Make it strong. I am going into town and will be back by evening." The carpenter looked at the creek, looked at the timber, and said, "I think I understand the situation. I will do my best." The elder brother left for town. The carpenter set to work, measuring and sawing and hammering through the long afternoon. When the elder brother returned at dusk, he walked down toward the creek, expecting to see a high wooden wall blocking his view of his brother's land. Instead, he found a bridge. A simple, sturdy bridge stretching from one bank of the creek to the other, with handrails on both sides and wide planks that caught the last of the evening light. And there, already crossing it from the far side, was his younger brother, walking toward him with his arms open. "After everything I said," the younger brother called out, "You built this? You built this for me?" The two men met in the middle of the bridge. For a moment they stood there, not speaking. Then the elder brother reached out and took his brother's hand, and whatever had been between them for those bitter months began, very slowly, to dissolve. They turned to thank the carpenter, but he was already shouldering his toolbox and heading up the road. "Stay," the elder brother said. "There is more work here. I have other projects." The carpenter shook his head. "I would like to," he said, "but I have many more bridges to build." The carpenter did not ask permission. He did not consult the elder brother about whether forgiveness was appropriate or whether the younger brother deserved it. He simply saw what was needed and built it. The fence would have done what fences do: solidify the division, make the separation permanent, turn a temporary quarrel into a lasting wall. The bridge did what bridges do. It made crossing possible. It did not force the crossing. It did not guarantee reconciliation. It simply opened a way. Forgiveness works like this. It does not require the other person to apologize. It does not require the situation to be resolved. It does not even require understanding why the hurt happened. It simply opens a way. It lays down planks across the creek and lets the walking happen if it will. And here is the part that is hardest to see from the inside. The fence does not protect the one who builds it. The fence locks the builder on one side of the creek, alone, with the anger and the grievance as constant companions. The wall faces outward, but the imprisonment faces inward. The carpenter understood this. He built the bridge because the bridge was the only thing that could set the elder brother free. Notice, too, what happened on the far bank. The younger brother saw the bridge going up and started across it before a single word had been exchanged. He had been carrying his own weight all those months, the weight of things said and done, the fear that the door was closed for good. Being forgiven has its own release in it. It tells a person that they are more than the worst thing that passed between you, that the 40 years count for more than the one bad season. Sometimes the bridge is built for someone who has been standing at the water's edge the whole time, waiting for any sign that crossing is allowed. But forgiveness does not apply only to other people. This is where the teaching deepens into something less familiar and more important. In the Taoist tradition, a story is told of a sage who lived on a hillside with a single student. The student was earnest and hard-working, but she carried a heaviness that she could not shake. She was often irritable, quick to take offense, slow to let things go. The sage observed this for some time before offering an unusual assignment. One morning, he gave her an empty sack and a basket of potatoes. "Think of everyone who has wronged you," he said. "For each person, write their name on a potato and put it in the sack." The student thought carefully. She came up with quite a few names. By the time she was done, the sack was heavy. "Carry this with you wherever you go," the sage said. "For 1 week. We will talk after that." At first, the student did not think much of it. The sack was awkward but manageable. She slung it over her shoulder and went about her days. She carried it to the well. She carried it to meals. She set it beside her sleeping mat at night. But after a few days, the potatoes began to soften. A sour smell rose from the sack. The weight, which had seemed manageable at first, became a burden that required constant attention. She could not set it down without remembering to pick it up. She could not do her work without shifting it from one shoulder to the other. By the end of the week, the smell was strong and the weight had worn a raw spot on her shoulder. She brought the sack back to the sage. He could see from her face that she understood something. "When we refuse to forgive," he said, "we carry that weight everywhere. It does not diminish on its own. It grows heavier and more sour with time. And the carrying requires so much attention that there is less and less room for anything else." That one line, "it does not diminish on its own," corrects a comforting myth. People say that time heals, and time does soften many things. But a grievance is not one of them, because a grievance is fed. Every remembering waters it. A hurt from 30 years ago, regularly revisited, is not 30 years old at all. It is as fresh as its last retelling. Time only heals what we stop tending, which means the healing was never really time's work. It was the stopping. "Then forgiveness is removing the potatoes," the student said. "It is," the sage agreed. "One by one. Each name released is a weight set down." The student sat with this. Then she asked, "But what about new names? What about the people who will wrong me next week?" The sage smiled. "That is the deeper question," he said. "The potatoes are not the real problem. The sack is the real problem. The sack is the part of us that collects offenses in the first place. The part that inscribes names and carries them. As long as we carry the sack, it will fill again. But if we set the sack down, if we stop collecting, then there is nothing to carry and nothing to forgive." This is where forgiveness moves beyond the personal and into something larger. It becomes forgiveness of experience itself, forgiveness of one's own life. Because we do not only carry grudges against other people, we carry grudges against circumstances, against the body that did not perform as we wished, against the career that did not unfold as planned, against the relationship that ended, or the one that never began. against the weather and the timing and the thousand small indignities of being alive. We carry a sack full of all the ways life did not match our expectations, and the sack grows heavier every year. And for many of us, the heaviest potato in the sack has our own name written on it. The unkind thing said years ago that still surfaces at 2 a.m. The chance that was there and was not taken. The person we were at 25, judged endlessly by the person we are now, who knows things the younger one could not have known. Self-forgiveness follows the same rule as every other kind. Withholding it does not improve anyone. It does not undo the past or educate the younger self. It only keeps one hand permanently occupied with the gripping. The teachers of loving-kindness practice often say that the wish for well-being must eventually include the one making the wish, and this is why. A heart cannot fully open outward while one finger is still pointed inward. Forgiving your life does not mean pretending it was easy or that the hard parts did not matter. It means setting down the argument with what happened. It means allowing the past to be the past without the ongoing commentary of how it should have been different. It means looking at the whole shape of things, the disappointments and the gifts, the losses and the surprises, and saying, without bitterness, this is what it was, and I am still here. This is not resignation. Resignation is heavy. Forgiveness is light. Resignation says, I give up. Forgiveness says, I give this back. It returns the weight to the ground. It opens the hand that has been clenched around the ember. And what is left, when the hand opens, is a hand that can touch things again. A hand that can receive what is being offered right now, in this moment, instead of clutching what was taken away in some earlier one. There is a saying often shared by the meditation teacher Jack Cornfield: forgiveness means giving up all hope of a better past. That phrase is almost funny, and it is also completely precise. We cannot change what has already happened. We can only change our relationship to it. And the moment we stop demanding that the past be different, a door opens. The door to the present. The door to peace. The door that was always there but could not be seen through the thick wall of grievance. In the texture of daily life, forgiveness is rarely a single dramatic act. It is more like the carpenter's work, measuring, sawing, hammering, plank by plank. It is the small, repeated decision to put the potato down, to stop rehearsing the story of what went wrong, to notice the familiar tightening of the chest that comes with a certain memory, and instead of feeding it with more attention, to let it be, to breathe with it, to let it soften. No one sees this work, and no announcement marks its progress, and that is part of its nature. Bridges get built quietly. Some things take a long time to forgive. That is all right. Forgiveness is not a deadline. It is a direction. It is the willingness to move toward the bridge, even if crossing it takes years. Even if, on some days, all that is possible is to look at it from a distance and know it is there. And when a piece of it finally happens, when one potato actually leaves the sack, the body knows before the mind does. Something in the shoulders gives way. A breath goes deeper than the breaths before it. People sometimes describe it as setting down a bag they had forgotten they were carrying, because the weight had been there so long it had come to feel like part of them. That physical lightness is trustworthy. It is the difference between deciding to forgive, which the mind can announce 100 times, and forgiveness actually occurring, which happens once, quietly, and leaves the room feeling larger. What matters is the direction. away from the fence, toward the bridge, away from the sack, toward the open hand. Because on the other side of every act of forgiveness, however small, is the peace that was being sought all along. The peace that could not be found while the ember was being held. The peace that arrives, as it always does, when the fighting finally stops. So for now, if there is something held tightly, let it be held a little more loosely. If there is a name inscribed somewhere in the heart, let the inscription fade, just a shade, just for tonight. There is no need to resolve anything. There is no need to force an opening. Just the willingness to hold a little less tightly is itself the first plank of the bridge. The breath continues. The evening deepens. And whenever the time feels right, we will go on. The Buddha, shortly after his enlightenment, was asked by a wandering ascetic what kind of being he was. He did not answer with a title or a category. He said simply, "I am awake." The word he used was Buddha, which means exactly that, one who has woken up. Waking up, in the Buddhist sense, includes waking up to the full scope of a human life. Its beginning, its unfolding, its end. The tradition does not look away from endings. It does not pretend that everything lasts forever, or that loss can be avoided, or that the final chapter of a life is anything other than what it is. But it holds endings differently than most of us are taught to hold them. It holds them with a lightness that is not indifference and a tenderness that is not grief. It holds them the way you might hold a cup that has been passed through many hands and will someday be set down for the last time, carefully, gratefully, without clutching. This is the teaching we come to now. It is about endings, about the ordinary, universal fact that every life has a shape, and the shape includes a close, and about the surprising discovery that looking clearly at that close does not darken the middle. It gentles it. In an old village in the countryside, there lived a teacher who had spent his whole life in the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. He had taught 3 generations of children. He had watched the village grow and change around him. He had buried his wife and seen his own children grow and leave and return with children of their own. Now he was very old, and he was dying. Everyone in the village knew it. His granddaughter, a woman in her middle years, had come to stay with him in his last days. She slept in a chair beside his bed and brought him water and tea and sat with him through the long hours. The old man drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes he was present and alert, his eyes clear, his voice steady. He would ask about the neighbors, or about a bird he could hear outside the window, and once he corrected her grammar out of pure habit, and they both laughed. Other times he seemed far away, his breathing slow and shallow, his gaze fixed on something no one else could see. During these faraway times, his granddaughter would lean close and speak to him softly. She had read about how to help someone at the end. She told him it was all right to let go. She told him he did not need to hold on anymore. She told him that everything was taken care of, that his affairs were settled, that the people he loved were safe. She meant well. She was trying to give him permission to leave. One evening, his breathing changed. It became irregular, halting, with long pauses between the breaths. She drew her chair closer and began again, very gently, with the words she had prepared. "You can rest now. You do not need this body anymore. Let yourself go. His breathing continued its strange rhythm. She spoke for a long time, saying everything she thought needed to be said. And then, gradually, his breathing steadied. It became regular again. He opened his eyes and looked at her. He was completely present, clear, almost amused. "You know," he said, "it is not that big of a deal." She stared at him. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks. She had been carrying the weight of it, the solemnity of it, the enormity of it. And here he was, looking up at her from the pillow with an expression that was something close to mischief. "It is not that big of a deal," he said again. And then he closed his eyes and slept. He did pass, some days later, on a morning when the light was coming through the window and the room smelled of tea. His granddaughter was beside him, and the sentence he had given her stayed with her for the rest of her life. Not as a dismissal of his death, or of death in general, but as something else. A lightness, a perspective so large that even this, even the final breath, was held inside it without being crushed by it. Years later, she found that the sentence had quietly changed how she met other hard things. When troubles came, and they came as they come, to everyone, some part of her would hear his voice, half amused, entirely calm, and the trouble would settle into its true size. She never said the words aloud to anyone in a difficult moment, because said aloud at the wrong time, they could sound cold. She simply carried them, the way a person carries a smooth stone in a pocket, and touched them when needed. There is a comfort in those words that has nothing to do with minimizing what endings mean to the people left behind. Grief is real. Loss is real. The absence of someone loved is a presence all its own, and it does not help to pretend otherwise. The old man was in good company across the tradition. For centuries, Zen masters in China and Japan met their final days in the same spirit, and many of them marked the occasion by writing a short farewell poem, calm and clear-eyed, often about clearing weather or the autumn moon. The master, Shaun, it is recorded, gathered his students on his last morning, wrote of rain ending and clouds parting, and passed peacefully while they chanted around him. What runs through all these accounts is a shared quality, no drama, no protest, and very often a touch of lightness, as though the masters were confirming with their final act everything they had taught with their lives. But there is something the old teacher saw from his particular vantage point that the rest of us, caught up in the middle of things, tend to miss. He saw the ordinariness of it, not the meaninglessness, the ordinariness. The fact that this is a road everyone walks, that billions have walked it before and billions will walk it after, that the great, terrifying, unthinkable thing is also the most common thing in the world. A young man facing his own ending once said something similar. He was calm, and when someone asked him how he could be so calm, he said, "So many people have done this before." There is nothing stoic in that sentence. There is no gritting of teeth. There is, instead, a kind of belonging, a joining, a recognition that this particular passage, which feels so singular when it is yours, is in fact the most shared experience there is. Every being that has ever lived has done this. Every leaf, every wave, every breath. The company is enormous. The solitude is an illusion. Something similar happens on a smaller scale whenever a person going through a hard time meets someone else who has been through the same thing. Nothing about the difficulty changes, and yet everything about carrying it changes. The room feels less empty. The road feels walked. This is what the young man had found, except that his company was every human being who ever drew breath. He had discovered that the loneliest seeming door in existence is actually the most crowded threshold there is. And knowing that does not make the passage less tender. It makes it more so. Because tenderness is what arises when something precious is held without grasping. When the cup is lifted and admired and set back down without the desperate need to keep it. When the whole shape of a life is seen at once, beginning and middle and end, and the seeing is full of love instead of fear. In the same spirit of seeing the whole shape clearly, there is an old practice that comes at the same truth from a very different direction. An abbess at a mountain convent was known for a particular exercise she gave to restless novices. When a young woman came to the convent full of turmoil about her life, about the choices she had made or failed to make, about the years she felt she had wasted, or the years she feared still lay ahead, the abbess would sit her down in a small room and give her a single instruction. "Tell me the story of your life," the abbess said. "Begin with the sentence, 'I was born.' End with what is happening now. And do it in no more than 10 sentences." The novice, a woman in her late 20s who had traveled a long way to reach the convent, looked at the abbess as though she had misheard. 10 sentences? For my whole life? Everyone begins with the same first sentence, the abbess said. "I was born on such and such a day. After that, let it come as it comes. Do not plan it. Do not organize it. Just let the true shape of your life emerge, one sentence after another. But no more than 10. That is impossible," the novice said. "My life is complicated. There is so much to account for." "Try," the abbess said. The novice spent the evening in turmoil. She wrote sentences and crossed them out. She tried to fit everything in, the childhood, the friendships, the disappointments, the turning points, the small victories, the long stretches of ordinariness. Every draft ran to 20 sentences, then 30. She could not compress it. Her life, she felt, was too full, too tangled, too important to be held in so few words. But the instruction was clear. 10 sentences. No more. Sometime late in the night, she stopped trying to include everything and started listening instead. She closed her eyes and let the sentences rise on their own, the way a dream surfaces from below. She wrote them down without editing. When she was done, she counted. 8 sentences. She read them back. Her whole life was there. The essence of it. The shape. It was simpler than she had imagined. Far simpler. And seeing it in 8 plain sentences did not diminish it. It clarified it. The shape was clean and true, and it held everything that mattered, and the rest, the commentary and the analysis and the endless second-guessing, fell away like scaffolding from a finished building. She brought the sentences to the abbess the next morning. "How many?" the abbess asked. 8. The abbess nodded. "Everyone is surprised," she said. "We carry around such elaborate stories about who we are and what happened to us. But the true shape of a life is simple. A few sentences, a few turning points, and the rest is weather." The novice looked down at her page. "But the things I left out," she said. "The years I struggled, the mistakes, do they count for nothing?" "They count," said the abbess. "They count as weather counts. The rain matters to the field. But when you describe the field to someone, you describe the field. The novice kept those 8 sentences for years, folded into the back of a book, and each time she found them again, they were still true. The rest is weather. This is not a dismissal. The weather matters. The days between the turning points are full of life. But the weather passes, and the shape remains. And seeing the shape, seeing the simplicity of it, does something to the grip we hold on all of it. The grip loosens. The terrible seriousness softens. The sense that every moment must be momentous, that every decision is life or death, that every day must justify itself, relaxes into something more truthful and more kind. The abbess had noticed something else over her years of giving this exercise, though she rarely said it aloud. The sentences that survived the compression were almost never about the things people spent their days worrying over. No one's 8 sentences mentioned the argument that consumed a month, or the money trouble that stole a year of sleep, or the opinion of a difficult neighbor. What survived, again and again, were the loves, the departures, the arrivals, the moments of unexpected kindness given or received. The exercise did not just reveal the shape of a life. It quietly revealed what a life is actually made of, and how little of it resembles the daily inventory of concerns. A life seen in 8 sentences is a life held lightly. And a life held lightly is a life that can be lived fully, because the living is not burdened by the constant narration of its own importance. The old contemplatives knew something else about keeping endings in view. It rearranges the days. A person who remembers, even faintly, that the road has an end, finds that certain things quietly stop mattering. The slight from a co-worker loses its sting by supper time. The need to be right in a small argument evaporates mid-sentence, and other things move up the list. The phone call to an old friend gets made this week instead of someday. The walk gets taken while the evening is still warm. Nothing dramatic changes on the outside, and yet the hours begin to sort themselves differently, as if a wise editor had gone through the schedule and crossed out the filler. The awareness of endings, held gently, turns out to be a practical instrument. It clarifies what a day is for. The old teacher on his deathbed knew this. The novice in the small room discovered it. The shape is simple. The passage is shared. The ending is ordinary. And the ordinariness is not a diminishment. It is a relief. Because when something is ordinary, it does not require heroism. It does not require special equipment or special knowledge or special preparation. It requires only presence, only willingness, only the simple act of being here for what is here, however many sentences it turns out to be. The most experienced travelers of this road, after all, were ordinary people too. Every last one of them, and they managed it without exception. This is what the contemplation of endings does to the middle of a life. It does not darken it. It clears the air. It removes the false urgency and the false permanence and leaves behind something open and honest and unexpectedly free. The days are still the days. The weather is still the weather. But the watching has changed. It has become lighter, less clutching, more willing to let each day be what it is and then let it go. It is not that big of a deal. So many people have done this before. And somehow, in those 2 sentences, there is more peace than in all the solemnity and gravity we usually bring to the subject. So for now, let the story of this day be short. 1 sentence, maybe 2. Whatever happened, It can be held that lightly, at least for tonight, and probably held that lightly for good. Let the simplicity of it be enough. The elaborate version, the one with all the commentary and the worry, can wait. Tonight, the shape is simple. There is this breath. There is this rest. There is this moment, shared with everyone who has ever rested and breathed and let the day close. Let it be that simple, and we will continue together soon. This is the direct way, friends, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destroying of pain and grief, for reaching the right path, for the realization of peace, namely, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. These are the words the Buddha used to open and close his great discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. They frame everything. They are the promise and the instruction and the assurance, all in one breath. And the word that anchors them is the same word we have been circling all evening: direct. This is the direct way. It begins here. It ends here. It does not require a detour through some distant land. But the teaching also carries inside it a recognition that most people do not see the truth the moment they hear it. Most of us need practice. Most of us need to sit with the seeing, again and again, before it settles deeply enough to hold. The Buddha knew this. He divided seamless experience into 4 approachable parts, 4 foundations, so that what is actually one continuous awareness could be learned one facet at a time. Body, feeling tone, mind states, the nature of things as they are. This is, in the most generous sense, a course in remedial seeing. Not because there is anything wrong with us, but because the dust accumulates. The habits of grasping and pushing and dimming cloud the vision, and the vision needs wiping clear. Sometimes it only takes a small wiping. Sometimes it takes years. But the seeing itself, when it comes, is always the same, simple, direct, and impossibly close. The tradition has always held both speeds with equal respect. Some awakened in a single hearing, and their stories are treasured. Others, including some of the Buddha's own closest students, worked at it across decades, stumbling and returning, and their stories are treasured just as much. Needing the full course carries no shame in it. A person who learns to read at 40 has learned to read, and the words on the page open for her exactly as they open for anyone. The teaching meets each person at whatever depth the dust happens to lie, and it is patient in a way that we, gauging our own progress, rarely are with ourselves. The oldest records preserve an account of the very first meeting the Buddha had after his enlightenment, before he gave his first formal teaching, before the great wheel of the Dharma began to turn. He was walking alone on the road between the Bodhi tree and the city of Gaya, heading toward his former companions to share what he had realized. The road was dusty and ordinary, the kind of road merchants and pilgrims and wanderers had walked for generations. And on that road, he met a wandering ascetic named Upaka. Upaka had spent years in spiritual search himself. He had fasted and practiced and studied under teachers, and he knew the look of seekers the way a farmer knows the look of weather. Most of the holy men on those roads carried their striving on their faces. But he did not know who the man before him was, and this man carried something else. His bearing was calm. His face was clear. His eyes had a quality that stopped Upaka in his tracks. "Friend," Upaka said, "your faculties are so clear. Your complexion is pure and bright. Under which teacher have you trained? Who is your guide? "Whose teaching do you follow?" The Buddha answered, "I have no teacher. No one taught me what I have come to know. I realized it myself through my own direct seeing." Upaka looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "It may be so, friend." He nodded his head, turned, and took a different path. That is all. The ascetic heard the truth, acknowledged it might be true, and walked away. He was not ready. The dust in his eyes was not yet thin enough. The words did not land, and the Buddha let him go. There was no calling after him, no second attempt, no argument on the dusty road. This detail is easy to pass over, and it holds a teaching of its own. Truth does not chase. It does not need to. A person can be pressured into agreement, but no one has ever been pressured into seeing, because seeing happens only when the eye is ready. So the Buddha simply continued toward the deer park, and the road absorbed the moment, as roads do, and the whole exchange looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. But the story does not end there. The tradition records that years later, after a long and winding life, Upaka remembered that meeting on the road. The seed that had been planted in that brief exchange, the image of a man whose faculties were so clear and whose face was so bright, had been growing quietly inside him all that time. He sought out the Buddha, found the community of practitioners, and took up the path. The seeing that had not come in a flash came instead in a slow unfolding, and when it arrived, it was the same seeing. This is one of the most encouraging things about the tradition. The teaching does not require perfection. It does not require a dramatic breakthrough. It requires only that the dust be thin enough and that someone keep wiping. The Buddha himself hesitated before deciding to teach. After his awakening, sitting alone beneath the tree, he considered the vastness of human confusion and the subtlety of what he had seen, and he wondered whether there was any point in trying to share it. People were so deeply caught in their habits of clinging and aversion. The teaching was so different from anything they were accustomed to hearing. Would anyone understand? This is when, according to the canon, the great divinity Brahmasahampati appeared before him and made a plea. "There are beings with little dust in their eyes," Brahma said. "They are falling away because they have not heard the teaching. There will be those who understand." Little dust. The plea did not ask for beings with no dust at all, or for perfect clarity. It asked on behalf of those with only a thin film over the seeing, a readiness, a nearness. Brahma was not asking the Buddha to enlighten the entire world in one stroke. He was asking him to speak for the sake of those who were almost ready. Those who needed only a small clearing of the vision. Those for whom a word, a phrase, a story heard at the right moment might be enough to shift the seeing from clouded to clear. The Buddha considered this. And then, the canon says, he surveyed the world with the eye of a Buddha, and he saw that Brahma was right. Among all the beings in the world, some were like lotuses deep beneath the water, far from the surface, not yet ready. Some were at the waterline, half emerged, approaching readiness, and some were already standing above the surface, clear of the water, needing only the sun. It is a gentle image to sit with, because it removes all blame from the picture. A lotus deep under the water is not failing. It is not lazy or stubborn or lost. It is simply at the depth it is at, doing exactly what lotuses do, rising at its own pace toward a light it cannot yet see. Every blossom in the pond is the same flower at a different moment of its rising. The pond is not divided into worthy and unworthy. It is divided only by time. And the ones standing free of the water this morning were, not so long ago, in the darkness at the bottom, and nothing about them was different then, except the date. He decided to teach. Flung open are the doors to the deathless, the Buddha said. Let those with ears to hear commit to faith. And with that, the teaching began. The same teaching that has been passed hand to hand, voice to voice, for 2,500 years. The same teaching that the Satipatthana Sutta opens and closes with. The same 4 foundations. The same direct way. The promise embedded in this teaching is remarkable. The Buddha said that with diligent practice, awakening is possible in 7 years, or 7 months, or 7 weeks, or 7 days. The numbers are not the point. The point is the directness. The point is that the path does not stretch out to infinity. It begins here, in the body, in the breath, in the knowing of what is present, and it can arrive, at any moment, at the recognition that was always waiting beneath the dust. The 4 foundations are not 4 separate practices. They are 4 ways of looking at the same seamless experience. The body is always present. The feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, is always coloring the moment. The state of the mind, clear or clouded, restless or calm, is always available to be known. And the deeper patterns, the arising and passing of all conditioned things, are always in play. Each foundation is a different window onto the same room. Through the first window, a person waiting for a kettle to boil can feel her own feet on the kitchen floor, the warmth of the stove, the weight of her shoulders, and in that feeling she is practicing. Through the second, a man stuck in traffic can notice the unpleasant flavor of the delay before it hardens into a mood, and in that noticing, he is practicing. Through the third, anyone can glance inward at any hour and ask what the mind itself is like right now, cramped or roomy, hurried or settled, and the glance is the practice. And through the fourth window, a person watching leaves come down in the autumn wind is watching the deepest teaching there is, arising and passing, displayed for free on every street. The windows all open onto the same room. Enter through any of them, and you are inside. On different days, different windows are nearer to hand, and the tradition sees no ranking among them. We have been walking through these foundations all evening without naming them. When we sat with the natural ease of the mind, we were in the territory of the first foundation, awareness of the body at rest. When we watched the hinge of feeling tone, the reach and the push and the dimming, we were in the second. When we noticed the state of the mind itself, the grasping or the openness, we were in the third. And when we looked at impermanence, at the cause and the ceasing of suffering, we were in the fourth. These are not complicated. They do not require special training or unusual ability. They require only the willingness to look at what is already here, to see the breath as it is, to feel the body as it is, to know the mind as it is, and to recognize, in that seeing, that everything is arising and everything is passing, and that the seeing itself is the freedom. This is what the Buddha offered when Brahma asked him to teach. This is the direct way. This is the clearing of the dust. There is a particular form of inspiration that comes from knowing there is a precedent. The tradition is full of accounts of people who heard a single sentence and woke up. A monk who spent decades in confusion heard a bird call at dawn, and the confusion dissolved. A practitioner struggling for years heard a pebble strike bamboo, and everything fell into place. These stories are real. They are part of the record, and they carry a specific kind of encouragement. It has happened before, so it could happen now. Sitting down to listen to a teaching with that thought nearby changes the quality of the listening. The ears open differently when a door is known to exist. Upaka heard the truth on the road and walked away. But the seed was planted, and years later, the seed broke ground. The timing was not in his hands. The readiness was not something he could manufacture. But the hearing had happened, and the hearing had done its quiet work. This is how hearing works in ordinary life as well. A line read in a book at 20 returns, fully alive, at 45, when the life has finally caught up to it. A remark a grandmother made in passing surfaces decades after she is gone, and suddenly it is not a remark, but a key. We are all carrying sentences we are not yet ready for. They wait with perfect patience, asking nothing, and one day, some turn of events wipes the last of the dust away, and there they are, waiting, as bright as the moment they were spoken. There is also a humbler reason the tradition asks for practice rather than a single moment of understanding. Insight fades. Anyone who has ever seen something clearly, truly clearly, on a walk or in a conversation or in the middle of the night, knows how strange it is to find the same insight, thin and papery a week later. The words are still there, but the seeing has drained out of them. This is nothing to be ashamed of. It is simply how the mind works. The old habits of grasping and hurrying are deep grooves, worn by decades of repetition, and one clear moment does not fill them in. So the tradition answers repetition with repetition. Sit again. Look again. Hear the same teaching for the 40th time and let it be slightly newer than the 39th. The dust does not get wiped once. It gets wiped daily, the way a well-loved window gets cleaned each morning, because dust is simply what air does to glass. This is the guardianship that practice offers. It protects the hearing itself, rather than any particular state of mind or special experience. It keeps the dust from settling back. It returns, again and again, to look once more, until the seeing is clear enough to hold. The Buddha promised that the seeing can come in 7 days. It can also come in 7 decades. The timeline is honestly beside the point. The sitting is the point, and the willingness to keep looking, and the trust that the direct way is direct, that the truth is close, that the dust is thin, and that one more wiping might be all it takes. So let this be a moment of hearing. There is no need to strain toward it, and no need to understand anything. Just hearing, the way you hear rain on a roof, without effort, without analysis, without needing it to mean anything. The teaching has been spoken. The 4 doors have been opened. The direct way has been pointed to, again as it has been pointed to for 25 centuries. And if the hearing lands, even lightly, even as a whisper, then the seed is planted. It will do its work in its own time, in the season that belongs to it and to no one's schedule. There is nothing left to add tonight, and nothing that needed adding in the first place. Rest here. The doors are open. The next step will come when it comes. In the Buddhist tradition, the practice of metta, of loving kindness, is not treated as an obligation. It is not a rule to be followed or a duty to be discharged. It is described, again and again, as what naturally arises when the heart is at rest. when the mind is no longer grasping, no longer pushing, no longer lost in the fog of its own busyness, what comes forward on its own is a wish for the well-being of others. It is not manufactured. It is not willed. It is the natural overflow of a mind that has come home. This is the teaching that closes our evening together, and it is, in a sense, the completion of everything that came before. We began with the peace that was never missing. We walked through the end of struggle, the homecoming, the lightness of impermanence, the hinge where craving begins, the opening of forgiveness, the ordinariness of endings, and the direct path of clear seeing. All of those teachings lead here, to this moment, to the discovery that when a person is genuinely settled, genuinely at rest, the very first thing that rises from that rest is care. Care for others. Care for the world. Care that has no agenda and no boundary and no conditions attached. The peace and the kindness are the same thing, seen from two directions. One looks like stillness, the other looks like warmth, and neither can be found for long without the other. The Buddha once told his monks about two acrobats who performed in the village markets. A master acrobat set up a tall bamboo pole in the center of the square. It was market day, and a crowd had gathered, farmers and merchants and children pressing close to watch. He steadied the pole against his shoulders and called to his young apprentice, a girl who had trained with him for years. She climbed the pole and balanced on top, high above the crowd, her body poised, the pole swaying gently beneath her. The square went quiet. Even the vendors stopped calling their wares. From below, the master called up to her, "Here is how we will do this safely. You watch after me, and I will watch after you. We will guard each other, and that way we will perform our display, earn our fee, and both come down safely." The apprentice, balanced above him on the trembling pole, called back down, "With respect, teacher, that will not work. If I am busy watching you, I cannot keep my own balance. And if you are busy watching me, you cannot hold the pole steady." The master listened. "Instead," she said, "let each of us watch after ourselves. You hold the pole with full attention. I will keep my own body balanced with full attention. Each of us tending to our own steadiness, we will both be safe, and the display will be beautiful." The Buddha, telling this story to his monks, said, "It is just as the apprentice said. The practice of mindfulness is to be cultivated with the thought, 'I will watch after myself.' And the practice of mindfulness is also to be cultivated with the thought, 'I will watch after others.' Because watching after yourself, you watch after others. And watching after others, you watch after yourself." He then explained how this works. Watching after yourself means cultivating awareness, developing presence, returning again and again to the ground of mindful attention. And watching after others means practicing patience instead of impatience, kindness instead of harshness, care instead of neglect. The two are not separate practices. They are one practice seen from two angles. The Buddha's explanation runs in both directions, and both are true at once. Tending your own balance protects the people around you, because a settled person does not spill their turbulence onto others. And tending others protects your own balance, because patience and kindness are themselves steadying. Try to be genuinely patient with someone and stay agitated at the same time. It cannot be done. The patience quiets the agitation as a matter of course. So the acrobats are not choosing between themselves and each other. Every act of care, pointed in either direction, steadies the whole pole. This is a teaching that dissolves a false divide. We often think of inner work and outer care as competing activities. Time spent sitting in meditation is time not spent helping others. Energy directed inward is energy not directed outward. The spiritual path can seem, from certain angles, like a self-involved retreat from the world and its needs. But the parable of the acrobat says otherwise. It says that the steadiest help you can offer anyone is the steadiness of your own attention. A person whose mind is scattered and reactive and caught up in its own stories is not well positioned to help anyone, no matter how good the intentions. But a person whose mind is clear, whose heart is settled, whose presence is undivided, offers something to everyone around her, simply by being in the room. The steadiness travels. It communicates itself through tone and posture and timing and the quality of listening. It holds the pole for everyone. Everyone has felt this from the receiving end. A tense meeting where one person stays genuinely calm and the whole table gradually breathes easier. A frightening night in a hospital waiting room where a nurse moves without hurry, and her lack of hurry says more than any reassurance could. A child in tears who settles not because of anything said, but because the arms holding her are not trembling. None of these people were performing calm at anyone. They were simply balanced, and balance, it turns out, is contagious in exactly the way panic is, only pointed the other direction. This does not mean that action in the world is unnecessary. Of course, it is necessary. But the action that comes from a settled heart is different from the action that comes from a frantic one. The action from a settled heart is more accurate, more responsive, more able to see what is actually needed rather than what the mind's stories say is needed. The apprentice on top of the pole, balanced and present, is in a far better position to adjust to a shift in the wind than she would be if she were busy monitoring the master below. Balance first. Then the display becomes beautiful. Steadiness first. Then the care flows outward with a clarity that could never come from effort alone. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, one of the great Mahayana texts, a wise layman named Vimalakirti offered a teaching that has been passed down as the inexhaustible lamp. Vimalakirti was speaking to a group of seekers who were about to leave his house and return to their ordinary lives. They were troubled. They had tasted something during their time with him, a depth of understanding, a quality of peace, and they were afraid it would not survive the return to the noise and busyness of the world. How could they keep the flame alive when the wind outside was so strong? Vimalakirti listened to their fear and then said, "There is a teaching called the inexhaustible lamp. A single lamp may light hundreds of thousands of lamps without itself being diminished. In fact, the light does not diminish at all. It grows stronger." One of the seekers, a woman who had been silent until then, asked, "But the world we are returning to is windy. What if our own flame is small? A small flame lights another lamp exactly as well as a great one," Vimalakirti said. "The fire does not ask how large it is before it spreads. It only asks for a wick within reach. And you will find, when you have lit a few, that your own flame is not so small as you feared. Giving light is how a lamp discovers what it is." He looked at each of them. "When you return to your lives," he said, "you are not leaving the teaching behind. You are carrying the lamp. And every act of kindness, every moment of presence, every time you meet another person with an open heart, you are lighting their lamp from yours. And yours does not go out. It burns brighter for the sharing. The seekers carried this image with them when they left. A lamp that lights other lamps and grows brighter for it. Kindness that does not deplete the giver. Care that multiplies by being shared. This is the nature of metta, of loving kindness, as the Buddhist tradition understands it. It is not a finite resource that runs out if you give too much. It is not a sacrifice that empties the one who makes it. It is an overflow. The more it flows outward, the more there is. Like a spring that feeds a river, the flowing is what keeps the source alive. A spring that is dammed dries up. A spring that is open keeps filling. This is also why kindness practiced as a duty so often exhausts people, while the same kindness arising on its own does not. Duty draws from the surface, from willpower, and willpower is a shallow well. The overflow draws from somewhere else entirely, from the settled ground underneath, and that ground does not run dry. The difference can be felt from the inside. Kindness from duty leaves a person slightly depleted, keeping a ledger. Kindness from overflow leaves a person more awake than before, and mildly surprised because nothing was spent. This is why the tradition places metta at the end of the path rather than the beginning. Not because kindness must be earned before it can be practiced. Kindness can be practiced at any time, by anyone, in any condition. But because metta, in its fullest expression, metta that is truly inexhaustible, arises most naturally from a heart that has done the work of settling. A heart that has stopped struggling. A heart that has come home. When the mind is at rest, when the grasping has quieted, when the old arguments with life have been laid down, what is left is not emptiness. What is left is warmth. A warmth that does not come from trying, but from being. From simply being present, settled, at home in this body, in this moment. And from that warmth, as naturally as breath follows breath, comes the wish, may all beings be happy. May all beings be at peace. This same wish has been running underneath everything we have met tonight. It moved the Buddha when he decided to teach, and it moved Brahma Sahampati to plead for beings with little dust in their eyes. The master acrobat holds the pole steady with it, and Vimalakirti folded it into the lamp he sent his students home carrying. Across all these stories, one current, wearing different faces, and it rises, without effort, in anyone who has sat still long enough to hear it. We began this evening with a question. If peace is what we most deeply want, why does it seem so hard to find? And we have walked, through stories and teachings and reflections, toward an answer that is almost absurdly simple. Peace is hard to find because we are looking for it. It is hard to reach because we are reaching. It is hard to achieve because achieving is a kind of grasping, and grasping is the one thing peace cannot coexist with. Notice, too, the shape of the road we have walked tonight. It began with the peace that was already here, and it ends by arriving at that same peace, seen now from the far side of everything in between. The evening itself has traced the circle the teachings describe, out, through struggle and wanting and letting go, and back to the very ground it started from. Every journey in this tradition has that shape. The seeker leaves home, travels far, and comes back to the same door, and the only thing that has changed is the one knocking. An evening of listening can be a small version of the whole path, and this one was built to be exactly that. The peace was always here. It was the ground beneath the running. It was the sky behind the clouds. It was the stillness beneath the stirring. It was home. And from home, from that resting place, from the open hand and the unsearching eye, the old wish comes forward on its own. There is no place like home. And from home, the lamp is lit. And the lamp lights other lamps. And none of them go out. These two sayings, there is no place like home, and may all beings be happy, turn out to be closer than they look. The first is the arrival. The second is what the arrived heart says. A person who has truly come home to themselves does not sit at the window guarding the house. They find themselves, almost immediately, hoping everyone else finds their way home too, because the rest is so good that keeping it private never occurs to them. That hope is metta in its native form before any practice shapes it. Homecoming and goodwill are one event, heard from inside and from outside. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at ease. May all beings find the peace they have been carrying all along. In these final moments, let the wish be simple. Let it begin close and then widen, like the ripples from a stone dropped in still water. This near to far ordering is how the tradition has always taught the practice, and there is wisdom in the sequence. Love is easiest where it already flows, so the practice starts there, with oneself, with someone dear, letting the warmth become real and felt rather than imagined. Only then does it widen, carried outward on its own momentum, to the neutral faces and the distant strangers, and eventually to everyone. Starting with the whole world at once tends to produce a thin, dutiful wish. Starting close produces a warm one, and warmth, once moving, does not honor boundaries. May this breath be at ease. May this body rest. And from this rest, may the wish travel outward, to the people in the next room, and the people in the next house, and the people you will see tomorrow, and the ones you will never meet, and the ones on the other side of the world who are, right now, breathing the same air under the same sky. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at peace. May all beings come home. A wish like this can be carried across the border of sleep. The last thought before drifting off has a long reach, the old teachers say, coloring the night the way the last light colors the sky. Let this be that thought tonight. And if it is still nearby in the morning, in the first minute before the day begins making its demands, so much the better. A day that starts from the wish tends to keep a little of its warmth all the way through. The lamp is lit. It will not go out. Tomorrow it travels with you, invisible and weightless, into every room you enter. Let this be the resting place. Let the breath settle here, where the whole evening has been leading. We will close together in a moment. We have traveled a long way tonight, and we have ended up exactly where we started. That is the shape of this teaching. That is the shape of homecoming. The journey goes around the world and arrives at the doorstep, and the doorstep was here the whole time. The peace was never missing. The struggle was the suffering, and when the struggle softened, there was peace. The search for happiness, placed always one step ahead, was the very thing that kept happiness at arm's length. Impermanence, held without grasping, turned from a threat into a doorway. The hinge of feeling tone, seen clearly, lost its power to pull us off our ground. Forgiveness opened a hand that had been clenched around old weight. The endings that seemed so enormous turned out to be ordinary, shared, and strangely light. The 4 foundations of mindfulness were the direct way, this fathom-long body, this breath, this knowing. And from that knowing, from that rest, the wish for the happiness of all beings arose on its own, like a lamp that lights other lamps and never goes out. There is no place like home, and home is here. Let the breath carry you now, wherever it carries you. Let the body do what it knows how to do. Let the mind rest in its natural ease, and let everything else, the planning and the remembering and the reaching, wait until morning. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.